A lone figure, draped in a dark cloak that obscures his face, stands unyielding before a vast, heavily armored army. The enemy commander's voice rings out across the rocky terrain, mocking the solitary warrior for daring to challenge their overwhelming numbers alone. Yet, Kinesis remains perfectly still, his visible eye locked onto the approaching horde. He doesn't flinch as the enemy commander barks an order, unleashing a dense volley of arrows that darkens the sky. As the deadly rain descends toward him, the cloaked warrior simply raises a single, gloved hand, his posture relaxed and confident. With that simple gesture, the barrage of arrows halts abruptly in midair, frozen by an unseen force. Before the vanguard can comprehend the impossible sight, a massive, invisible weight slams into them, crushing the front line into the dirt and sending armored soldiers flying backward in a chaotic tangle of limbs and steel. Panic erupts among the surviving ranks as the very earth beneath them begins to tremble and tear apart. Soldiers scream in terror, looking over their shoulders to see colossal boulders ripping free from the ground and levitating high into the air, casting massive shadows over the broken army. Amidst the floating debris and the terrified cries of his enemies, the lone warrior strides calmly forward. The devastating power he wields, effortlessly manipulating the battlefield, is ironically known to the world as the weakest skill in history, telekinesis. Years before he became a battlefield legend, his reality was far more cruel. In a world where a child's entire future and social standing are dictated by the divine skills they receive at age 10, a young elk fell to his knees in despair, screaming as the crushing weight of his newly awakened, seemingly useless ability shattered his dreams. He spent his days in quiet frustration, straining with all his might just to make a small apple wobble on a wooden table. Despite his exhaustion and the meager results of his telekinesis, his loyal maid, Emma, stood by his side, clapping her hands and enthusiastically praising him for moving the fruit even a single centimeter. Her encouragement, however, couldn't pierce his gloom. He slumped forward, lamenting that as a duke's son, his meager power meant his life was effectively over. Gently taking his trembling hands in hers, Emma urged him to lift his head, softly reminding him of the solemn promise he had made to his mother, Lady Rose. She offered him a warm, unwavering smile, her eyes shining with genuine affection. With absolute certainty, she assured him that no matter what skill he possessed or what the future held, she and his mother would always be his greatest supporters, standing by his side through any hardship. Their tender moment was abruptly shattered by cruel laughter as his younger brother, Rashuo, and older sister, Sarisa, sauntered into the room. The siblings sneered, mocking Elk for his useless skill and insulting Emma's appearance, prompting the young boy to immediately step in front of his maid, his voice trembling but resolute as he demanded they stop their horrible insults. He stood his ground, shielding the young maid behind him as his younger brother, Rashuo, brandished a wooden practice sword with a mocking smirk. Feigning a slip, the blond boy warned him not to move, boasting of his newly acquired swordmaster skill and threatening the servant's safety if he dared to intervene. His glare hardened as Rashuo turned away, called by their sister, Sarisa, for their elite training sessions. The younger boy dismissed him with a sneer, bragging about their specialized instructors before casually dropping a final, ominous detail. Their father had summoned all the siblings for a meeting that evening. He had always been plagued by a profound sense of isolation, despite holding the title of the firstborn son and rightful heir to the Kinesis Duke family. Even before the fateful day the skills were bestowed, he had existed as an outsider within his own bloodline, a shadow standing apart from his golden-haired siblings. His knuckles whitened as he clenched his fist, haunted by the thought that a more prestigious blessing might have finally earned him his father's approval and a true place in the family. Swallowing his bitter reflections, he forced a reassuring smile for Emma, apologizing for the trouble and offering to fetch the first aid kit himself. Later, in the quiet of his room, he strained every nerve attempting to lift a simple apple with his mind, only managing to make it roll slightly across the desk, a meager victory that Emma still cheered with unwavering loyalty. Their private practice was abruptly cut short by a sharp knock at the door, summoning him to the promised meeting. He stood frozen before the imposing desk of his father, the Duke, who delivered the crushing blow with cold detachment. He was being officially stripped of his position as heir. When he desperately protested, citing the ancient traditions of the firstborn, the patriarch ruthlessly cut him off, declaring that such rights were reserved only for those possessing a skill worthy of their noble name. He listened in silence as the Duke's gaze, hardened by the eye patch over his right eye, offered no sympathy, dismissing telekinesis as utterly worthless. Yet, in a cruel twist of mercy, the older man offered a single, final chance to prove his worth, a concession granted solely out of respect for his late mother, Rose. His fleeting hope vanished as Rashuo stepped forward with a predatory grin, laying out the ultimatum, a formal duel between brothers. If the firstborn won, his birthright would be restored, but defeat meant surrendering the title of heir entirely to the young swordmaster, who eagerly awaited his response. His burden grew heavier as Sarisa chimed in, her voice dripping with condescension as she mocked his hesitation and dared him to run away like a coward. Their father quickly silenced the siblings' taunts, turning his stern, expectant gaze back to his eldest son, demanding a final decision. He remained silent for a heavy moment, his head bowed under the weight of their collective disdain, before his eyes snapped up, burning with sudden resolve. Meeting his brother's arrogant stare, he firmly accepted the challenge, committing himself to the duel that would decide his fate. He stared down his younger brother, gripping the wooden practice sword he had been given. Rashuo stood across the hall, arrogantly declaring that the first to yield would lose. Despite knowing Rashuo possessed the formidable swordmaster skill, the older boy clung to a sliver of hope, reasoning that his brother couldn't possibly be accustomed to wielding it yet. Tightening his grip on the hilt, he braced himself. He refused to surrender his birthright without a fight, convincing himself that victory was still within reach. His determination was immediately put to the test as the sharp command to begin echoed across the sparring hall. The two brothers locked eyes, the tension between them snapping like a taut wire. But before he could even raise his weapon, a sudden, invisible force seized him. His wooden sword clattered uselessly to the floor as he clawed desperately at his own throat, gasping for air. Across the room, Rashuo watched in mock disappointment, taunting his brother for seemingly surrendering before their blades had even crossed. Unable to withstand the suffocating pressure, he collapsed to his knees, his legs completely giving out. He cursed his sudden weakness, while even Rashuo seemed momentarily taken aback by the abrupt fall. Pinned face down against the cold stone, he felt as though his entire body had been encased in lead. Straining to lift his head, his gaze found his sister, Sarisa, who was watching him with a cruel, knowing smirk. A chilling realization washed over him. This unnatural gravity was her doing. Paralyzed and unable to even force a sound from his throat, he could only watch helplessly as Rashuo casually strolled toward him. His younger brother offered a mock apology, promising a peaceful death as a final act of mercy. To his absolute horror, the blunt tip of Rashuo's wooden practice sword began to gleam, transforming into a razor-sharp, lethal blade. Desperation clawing at his mind, he shifted his eyes toward the onlookers at the edge of the hall. His father, his sister, and the household staff simply stood there in deafening silence, making no move to intervene as his execution loomed. He finally grasped the horrifying truth just as the blade descended. This was never a fair duel. His own family had planned to murder him from the very beginning. His final thought faded into nothingness as the light completely vanished from his eyes, leaving him motionless on the sparring room floor. He awoke to the soft brush of petals against his skin, finding himself in a serene field of white flowers. Frantically, his hands flew to his abdomen, searching for the fatal wound that had just claimed his life, only to find his skin completely unblemished. Exhausted, the young boy collapsed back into the grass, gazing up at the bright sky. He wondered aloud if this was heaven, a stark contrast to the bitter reality of his family's hatred. He had only ever wanted to belong. As he whispered a quiet apology to his mother and Emma, a shadow fell over him, and a strange, winged figure leaned into his field of vision, playfully asking if Emma was his girlfriend. Startled by the sudden intrusion, he bolted upright. The winged girl simply materialized right behind him, humming a cheerful, inquisitive tune as she hovered over his shoulder. Recovering from his shock, he scrambled backward. The girl struck a dramatic pose, her white wings flaring out as she proudly introduced herself as the goddess Pepina. With a confident wink, she boasted about her own cuteness, fully expecting the boy to be awestruck by her divine presence. Still processing the bizarre encounter, he stammered out a hesitant confirmation, admitting he had indeed heard of her. The self-proclaimed goddess leaned in closer, her halo bobbing slightly as she eagerly urged the lost boy to continue. As she explained that he had stumbled into the realm between life and death, a rare stroke of luck for someone on the brink of dying, his mind raced. He couldn't help but notice that this eccentric, scantily clad girl bore absolutely no resemblance to the solemn statues and picture books depicting the great creator of their world. Despite his skepticism, he had to admit her spiritual energy was overwhelmingly vast. She continued her boastful lecture, declaring that a manifestation of her magnitude only occurred once every few millennia, making his presence there a truly historic anomaly. Brushing past his silent bewilderment, the goddess clapped her hands together. She acknowledged his mesmerized state, though her confidence bordered on delusion, and announced with a bright smile that the truly important part of their meeting was about to begin. Without warning, she lunged forward, grabbing him by the shoulders with startling enthusiasm. Before sending him back to the land of the living, she promised to bestow upon him a super rare skill, urging him to prepare to be amazed by her divine generosity. His response was immediate and utterly deadpan. He didn't need it. The blunt rejection completely flew over the goddess's head. Misinterpreting his flat refusal as overwhelming joy, she patted his arm, assuring him he could take his time to find the words to praise her greatness. He reiterated his stance, bluntly stating that acquiring a new skill was pointless now. The goddess recoiled, clutching her chest in exaggerated agony. She couldn't fathom his rejection, insisting that any other child his age would be ecstatic to receive such a divine gift. Desperate to convince him, She listed the legendary heroes and ancient kings who had eagerly accepted her boons in the past. When her grand tales failed to sway the boy's stoic expression, she shifted her approach. Leaning in, she gently reminded him of the world he left behind, pointing out that a girl named Emma was deeply worried about him. A vision materialized before them, revealing Emma weeping bitterly beside his comatose body. The goddess explained that his physical form still clung to life, waiting for his return. Yet, the sight only hardened his resolve. He explained that accepting a shortcut would be a betrayal to Emma, who had always believed in him, and a violation of the promise he made to his mother to succeed on his own merits. Clenching his fist, he declared his true ambition: to become strong enough to protect her using nothing but his innate, seemingly weak skill of telekinesis. With a sudden, respectful bow, he pleaded with the stunned goddess to become his master and train him. She stared down at him, utterly bewildered by a lost soul making such an unprecedented request. Her bewilderment quickly melted into radiant enthusiasm. Flashing a playful wink, she happily accepted his proposal. She admitted that she had taken a liking to his spirit, and besides, mentoring him would be an amusing way to pass the endless eternity of her realm. As they stood beneath the ethereal sky, he braced himself for the arduous journey ahead. He knew mastering telekinesis would take an immense amount of time, but he silently vowed to Emma that he would endure whatever it took to return her side. His solemn internal monologue was abruptly shattered when the goddess cheerfully called out to him. Startled, he asked exactly how many years this rigorous training would require. Striking a cute pose with a bright smile, she casually announced that it would take a staggering 2,000 years. The sheer absurdity of the time frame hit him like a physical blow, leaving him screaming in absolute disbelief. The sheer scale of the timeline hit Noah like a physical blow. He threw his hands up in disbelief, his voice cracking as he questioned the absurdity of training for 2 millennia. Surely, he argued, such a span would mean growing old and dying before he ever returned to the real world. He was quickly corrected by the goddess. With a dismissive wave and a touch of divine arrogance, she reminded him of her status, explaining that her realm operated on a completely different flow of time than the mortal plane. She held up a single finger to emphasize her point, clarifying the divine mathematics. 2,000 years of grueling training in her domain would equate to a mere 6 years passing in his home world. Even with the time dilation explained, a grim thought crossed his mind regarding the physical body he had left behind. He voiced his fear that his empty vessel might simply rot away, but she quickly assured him that as long as his soul remained intact here, his earthly form would survive and even continue to grow. His anxiety was further eased by the revelation that his loyal friend, Emma, was diligently watching over his comatose form. However, the goddess couldn't resist teasing him, playfully suggesting that if 2,000 years sounded too intimidating, he could simply take a rare skill and run back home right now. Her mocking tone struck a nerve, prompting him to shout a fiery refusal. He clenched his fist, his earlier doubts entirely replaced by a burning resolve. Swearing on his mother's grave, he declared that returning with just a rare skill wouldn't make him a proper man. He needed true strength for Emma's sake and his own. Amused by his fierce determination, the goddess laughed and officially declared the start of his grueling training. The young warrior listened intently as his divine instructor outlined their first subject, the fundamentals of telekinesis. She explained that the core principle of moving objects with one's mind was entirely dependent on the innate capacity of the user, dictating the sheer size and weight they could manipulate. She casually demonstrated the technique, but the result was catastrophic. A colossal chunk of the earth itself ripped upward into the sky with a deafening rumble, leaving both the boy and the goddess staring in stunned silence at the sheer, overwhelming scale of the power unleashed. Recovering from her own accidental display of terrifying might, she nervously tried to play it off as a simple, easy exercise. Unconvinced and thoroughly intimidated, he politely begged her to break the lessons down into much smaller, manageable steps. He soon found himself subjected to rigorous academic lectures from the goddess, who had enthusiastically donned scholar's robes for the occasion. Yet, despite the detailed chalkboard diagrams, putting the theory into practice proved agonizingly difficult. He was left gasping for breath, just trying to levitate a stone no larger than his fist. His apprehension grew as the goddess pointed out his physical weakness. She explained that mastering telekinesis required physical strength just as much as mental fortitude, cheerfully announcing that she had prepared a special guest to assist with his training. The guest turned out to be a terrifying horde of undead and demonic creatures summoned straight from the demon world. Donning a pair of dark shades and wielding a microphone, she gleefully declared that he needed to use his wits and newfound skills to escape, lest he become their next meal. What followed was a grueling, relentless gauntlet of survival. He fled from towering beasts, meditated under crushing waterfalls, and fought back with everything he had, slowly but surely learning to manifest his telekinetic power to hurl his monstrous pursuers away. Years of this divine torment forged him into a young man capable of astonishing feats. Without uttering a single incantation, he effortlessly levitated a massive, jagged island of earth and stone, earning genuine praise from his mentor for finally passing her rigorous test. Overjoyed by his progress, She embraced him warmly from behind. She marveled at how much he had grown, recalling the fragile soul who had once struggled to move a mere pebble. Their training transitioned to close-quarters combat. As they clashed wooden swords, she casually tried to recall the name of his younger brother, guessing incorrectly before he firmly corrected her, stating the boy's name was Rashuo. Pressing her attack, she mused about his siblings' formidable innate talents, the brother possessing the Sword Saint skill and the sister holding the Magic Saint title, and confidently declared that overcoming them would be an easy victory. She locked blades with him, her smile unwavering as she reminded him that he had been personally trained by a goddess. Because of that, she assured him his triumph was an absolute certainty. He absorbed her words as they separated, standing amidst a field littered with discarded weapons. With a newfound, steely resolve shining in his eyes, he silently vowed to himself that he would definitely win. With his 2 millennia of training finally complete, the time to depart had arrived. She playfully tugged at his shirt, asking if he was lonely and suggesting he stay for another 1,000 years. But he gently declined, offering a warm smile as he admitted that he had truly enjoyed his time in her realm. He stood before the goddess, his expression flat and unamused as he bluntly stated that the grueling millennia of training hadn't been fun in the slightest. Unfazed by his cold demeanor, Pipina merely smiled warmly, thanking him for his time and teasingly noting that his brutal honesty wouldn't win him any popularity contests. Shifting to a more serious tone, the winged deity reminded him of his ultimate goal. She explained that every ounce of power and experience he had gained would transfer back to the mortal realm, warning that the transition would be painful. Her voice then softened, urging him to return and demonstrate his newly perfected, god-tier telekinesis to Emma. Stepping close, she wrapped her arms around him from behind, her white wings folding gently around his shoulders. With absolute certainty, she whispered a final divine guarantee into his ear. With the immense power he now wielded, he would never lose to anyone again. Before he could process her words, she planted a swift, affectionate kiss on his cheek. Bidding him a cheerful farewell, her form dissolved into a brilliant, blinding light, leaving the young swordsman stunned as the divine realm faded away. Back in the mortal world, a quiet rural house was bathed in sunlight, where Emma was busy with her daily chores. Inside, the boy gasped, his eyes snapping open as he bolted upright in bed. He clutched his aching head, the memories of 2 millennia rushing back as he realized he had successfully returned to his 16-year-old body. The creak of the bedroom door drew his attention just as Emma stepped inside. She froze, her breath catching in her throat as she stared at the boy sitting up in bed, utterly paralyzed by the impossible sight of him finally awake. Overcome with emotion, she sprinted across the room and threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest as heavy tears streamed down her cheeks. Caught off guard by the sudden impact, he gently called out her name, a soft smile breaking through his confusion. He raised a hand to gently wipe the tears from her eyes, reassuring her that he was just as happy to see her. Once her sobs began to subside, he asked her to take a deep breath and explain everything that had transpired in the mortal realm during his long slumber. Regaining her composure, she revealed the grim truth. 6 years ago, the Kinesis family had callously ordered her to dispose of his comatose body and dismissed her from their service. Unable to bring herself to bury him, she had taken him away, marveling at how his cold form had remained perfectly preserved against all odds. A radiant, unwavering smile spread across her face as she confessed that she had never lost hope. She had spent every single day of those 6 years waiting for this exact moment, entirely faithful that he would eventually open his eyes again. He listened in quiet awe, deeply moved by her profound loyalty. He bowed deeply before the young girl, expressing his profound gratitude for her unwavering protection that had kept him alive. Flustered, Emma begged him to raise his head, still addressing him with utmost reverence. With a gentle smile, he corrected her, explaining that he was no longer a noble and asked her to drop the formal title. His gentle demeanor vanished as terrified screams echoed from outside. Brutal orcs had breached the village, sending the locals fleeing in panic. Quickly assessing the chaos through the window, he instructed Emma to remain hidden in the safety of the room while he handled the threat. Without hesitation, he vaulted through the open window, ignoring Emma's worried cry. As he plummeted toward the ground, his eyes sharpened with focus, and he calmly commanded the scattered rubble below to rise. As he descended, the shattered stones and broken tiles immediately obeyed his will, defying gravity to swirl around him. Nearby guards could only stare in utter bewilderment as the young boy effortlessly manipulated the heavy fragments in midair. With a mere flick of his wrist, he sent a jagged chunk of masonry hurtling forward, striking a charging orc squarely in a vital spot. Watching the beast crumple, he decided to end the invasion in a single, decisive strike. He raised his hand high, drawing an immense arsenal of broken wood and stone into the sky above him. Frustration laced his voice as he shouted at the monstrous invaders, condemning them for senselessly destroying the villagers' homes. Bringing his arm down in a sweeping motion, he unleashed a devastating barrage. The suspended wreckage rained down like a meteor shower, violently crushing the horde of orcs beneath the overwhelming weight of their own destruction. His overwhelming display of power left the surviving villagers and guards completely speechless. They whispered among themselves in absolute awe, struggling to comprehend how a single boy had annihilated the entire raiding party in one breath. He touched down softly amidst the settling dust and ruined cobblestones. Glancing at his hands, he quietly thanked the gods, satisfied that his divine training had perfectly translated to the mortal realm. Standing victorious over the crushed remains of the invaders, he looked down with cold indifference. He declared their demise to be nothing more than pure karma, a fitting end delivered by the very homes they had sought to ruin. He turned at the sound of his name, surprised to see Emma rushing toward him. Tears streamed down her face as she cried out for him. He gently scolded her, reminding her that he had told her to stay safely at home, but she tearfully pointed out that he had sprinted off barefoot into danger. Her relief quickly gave way to frantic worry. She waved her arms wildly, demanding to know what had just happened, especially since he had only just woken from his long slumber. Before he could formulate a proper excuse for his sudden display of power, a sharp voice called out to him from behind. He turned to find the captain of the village guard approaching with a look of profound gratitude. The man confirmed that the young boy was indeed their savior, admitting he was at a loss for words to properly thank him. Brushing off the praise with a modest laugh, the boy insisted he had only done what was necessary, though internally, he realized he still needed to handle the aftermath. Taking charge of the situation, he immediately offered to clear the massive piles of rubble scattered across the village, suggesting the guards focus their efforts entirely on tending to the wounded. The captain was taken aback by the generous offer, but the boy confidently assured him that his long rest had left him brimming with excess energy. True to his word, he raised his hands, and massive chunks of stone and would begin to effortlessly float into the air. Emma watched in disbelief, protesting that tackling such a monumental task alone was impossible. He simply smiled, explaining that he wanted to restore her hometown as quickly as possible, and with his telekinetic abilities, he could work far faster than any cleanup crew. As he walked through the ruined streets, a whirlwind of debris followed his every gesture. Carts, barrels, and shattered beams hovered and sorted themselves under his invisible command, leaving the awestruck villagers to simply stare as their home was miraculously pieced back together. His cleanup efforts soon revealed a new, more gruesome problem, a towering mountain of defeated orcs. While a young child excitedly pointed him out as the village's protector, the adults murmured among themselves, unsure of how to dispose of the massive pile of monstrous carcasses. He stared at the pile, a sudden, practical thought crossing his mind. When he suggested they eat the beasts, Emma enthusiastically agreed, declaring orc meat to be a local delicacy. Having lived a sheltered life of nobility before his long sleep, he admitted with a spark of curiosity that he had heard of the dish but had never actually tasted it himself. He quickly transformed the grim aftermath into a bustling communal feast. Volunteering to handle the heavy labor of butchering the massive creatures, he urged the children to gather their families so the entire village could share in the bounty. As the savory scent of roasting meat filled the air and he carried a steaming bowl of stew, his eyes scanned the joyful crowd until he spotted Emma. He approached her with a warm smile, offering her the freshly prepared meal. She accepted it with a bright gasp of gratitude, respectfully addressing him by his noble title. Gently but firmly, he interrupted her, insisting that she drop the formal honorifics from now on, signaling a desire for a closer, more equal bond between them. He took a tentative bite of the stew, chewing thoughtfully before declaring the taste acceptable. Between spoonfuls, he gently reminded her that they would work on dropping the formal honorifics later. Suddenly, his eyes widened as the rich flavor fully registered. The rich taste took him completely by surprise. He enthusiastically declared that despite its unappealing origin, the orc meat was actually delicious. Sitting beside him on the bench, she giggled softly, teasing that he had already perfectly assimilated into village life. Her smile softened as she relayed the villagers' gratitude, explaining how happy they were to welcome such a powerful skill user into their home. Hearing her words, a profound sense of relief washed over him. He closed his eyes, silently reflecting that his 2,000 years of grueling effort and past traumas had finally paid off. The light-hearted atmosphere shifted as she leaned in closer, her expression turning earnest. Looking directly into his eyes, she asked if he would come live with her in her house. The bluntness of the invitation caught him completely off guard, leaving him stammering in shock. Realizing how her words sounded, her face flushed crimson. She frantically waved her hands, desperately trying to rephrase her overly forward request. Calming down, she explained the depth of her attachment. For 6 long years, she had watched over his motionless body, a vigil that had forged an unbreakable bond within her. Now, seeing him awake, strong, and admirable, she felt a profound connection she struggled to fully articulate. The memory of those quiet, anxious years weighed heavily on her mind. She recalled the countless hours spent sitting by his bedside, terrified by his unnatural stillness and the constant fear that he might never wake. The thought of history repeating itself was too much for her to endure. She confessed that she simply couldn't bear the thought of him disappearing or wandering off somewhere far away, her voice trembling slightly with lingering anxiety. He listened quietly, deeply moved by her heartfelt confession. Lowering his gaze to his open hand, he offered a gentle but firm apology. While her offer made him genuinely happy, he admitted that there was still something important he needed to accomplish. Her eyes widened in surprise, the lingering anxiety returning to her features. She stared at him, softly questioning what exactly it was that he still needed to do. She leaned forward on the stone bench, her voice laced with concern as she asked if he intended to return to the Kinesis family. She gently reminded him that his name had already been struck from their records. Beside her, he simply closed his eyes and shook his head, offering a flat, calm denial. His expression hardened into a confident smirk as he clenched his fist. He declared that he had no intention of reclaiming his noble title. Instead, as the arrogant faces of his former family, the Duke, his haughty siblings, and the rest of the Kinesis household, flashed in his mind, he revealed his true, singular goal. He was going to exact his revenge upon them all. Emma's eyes widened in sheer disbelief, the word hanging heavily in the air as she processed the concept of revenge. The young man's thoughts drifted over the quiet townscape. Having been reborn after a previous death, he knew that to truly move forward, he had to confront the lingering burdens in his heart. With that resolve, he formulated a proposal. Turning back to her with a bright, disarming smile, he pointed out that since they were both 16, attending school would be the perfect next step. The suggestion caught her completely off guard, prompting a startled gasp. He calmly elaborated on his plan, resting his hands on his knees. Beyond just making friends and studying the world, a formal academy would provide a neutral ground where siblings could settle their rivalries fairly, free from unnecessary distractions. She hesitated, her gaze dropping as she murmured that a commoner like herself had no right to attend such an institution. Unfazed, he placed a heavy, gleaming platinum coin onto the table, assuring her that wealth bridged the gap between nobles and commoners, and that she should leave the logistics to him. The source of this immense wealth was a parting gift from the goddess Pepina. He recalled the divine being's cheerful smile as she handed over the funds, insisting it was a necessary service for his return to the living world. With the finances secured, the enrollment procedures were swiftly completed. After receiving heartfelt gratitude from her parents, the two youths set off, waving goodbye to the gathered townsfolk who came to see them depart. Their journey led them to the Gallatin Kingdom, where a colossal, multi-tiered fortress of white stone and towering spires loomed against the sky, serving as their new academy. Now dressed in matching dark-vested school uniforms, they walked up the grand pathway. He noticed her anxiety and asked if she was nervous. She stammered in agreement, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the city and the school, while he casually consulted a map to find the entrance ceremony. Meeting her wide, apprehensive gaze, he offered a nonchalant response, completely unfazed by the majestic surroundings that had her so captivated. As he and Emma made their way along the path, a bespectacled boy fell in a step beside them. The newcomer offered a quick apology for his sudden intrusion, having correctly guessed that they were also heading toward the entrance ceremony. Eager to break the ice, the boy introduced himself as Nick, the son of a prominent merchant from the royal capital. He then gestured to the quiet girl beside him, introducing her as his sister, Mary. Nick proudly elaborated that their family ran the Senegal Trading Company, offering a warm, welcoming smile as he formally greeted his new peers. Returning the courtesy, the dark-haired youth introduced himself as Elk and his companion as Emma. Pleased by the introduction, Nick cheerfully suggested they all walk to the ceremony together, an offer Elk readily accepted. As they strolled down the tree-lined avenue, Nick turned his attention back to his new acquaintances, curiously asking which academic department they planned to join. He went on to explain the academy's division, noting that those aspiring to be knights or adventurers entered the skill department, while students aiming for a trade or profession enrolled in the commerce department. Without hesitation, Emma confirmed she would be joining the commerce department. Elk, standing firmly beside her, stated that his path lay within the skill department. Delighted by the news, Nick pointed out that Elk will be sharing classes with Mary. His curiosity piqued once more. He leaned in and asked Elk what specific combat skill he possessed. Meeting the merchant boy's gaze with calm indifference, Elk plainly stated that his designated ability was telekinesis. The casual revelation stopped Nick in his tracks. His eyes widened in sheer disbelief behind his glasses, stammering out a shocked gasp as he assumed Elk had to be joking. He quickly apologized, rubbing the back of his head as Mary sharply reprimanded him, reminding her brother that prying into another student's skill was incredibly poor manners. Observing their exchange, Elk realized just how useless telekinesis was considered by general society. Pushing the thought aside, he suggested they hurry along to the entrance ceremony. Inside the grand hall, the entrance ceremony commenced with a wave of excited murmurs rippling through the student body. All eyes turned to the center aisle as the new student representatives made their grand entrance, led by a confident young man. The confident youth was none other than Crown Prince Elwood of the Garway Kingdom. Whispers of awe followed his every step, praising him as an unparalleled genius blessed from birth with 3 distinct skills. Watching the prince from his seat alongside Emma, Nick, and Mary, Elk fell into quiet reflection. He had half expected his arrogant siblings, Rashuo and Sarisa, to make an appearance, but their absence only proved how vast the world truly was. Yet, as his gaze swept over the sea of assembled youths, one undeniable truth settled in his mind. There were formidable individuals hidden among the new students. Following the ceremony's conclusion, the group headed toward the central plaza for lunch, expecting to meet Mary, who had run ahead to secure a table. Instead, they arrived to find her visibly distressed, desperately defending her claimed spot from unseen aggressors who demanded she surrender it. The source of the trouble was a haughty, young nobleman with slicked-back hair, flanked by a towering, muscular lackey. The brute loomed over Mary, arrogantly declaring that his master, Marcos, the eldest son of Baron Paisley, desired the seat and expected her to vacate it immediately. Refusing to be intimidated, the young girl stood her ground. She fiercely rebuked their demands, shouting that true nobles should be utterly ashamed of using their status to threaten and bully others. Her defiance only irritated the arrogant nobleman. Dismissing her with a cold sneer, he casually ordered his enforcer, Gumbo, to silence her, prompting the massive brute to raise his hand for a vicious strike. Bracing for the impact, she squeezed her eyes shut, but the blow never landed. The hulking brute's arm froze mid-air, his face twisting in sudden confusion as an unseen force halted his strike completely. The moment the threat paused, a young man with glasses sprinted to her side, dropping to his knees to check if his sister was unharmed. Watching the reunion, the arrogant noble clicked his tongue in irritation, demanding to know what was interfering with his lackey. Standing a short distance away, Elk glanced back over his shoulder with a calm, unbothered expression. He simply stated the name of his skill, telekinesis. The noble scoffed at the revelation, loudly mocking the ability as utterly useless and questioning how anyone could enroll in the academy with such a pathetic power. Behind him, his large companion continued to struggle fruitlessly against the invisible grip holding his arm aloft. Growing impatient, the aristocrat barked an order for Elk to release his servant immediately. With a heavy sigh, Elk raised his hand and casually agreed, though he silently decided to only release the brute's arm, letting a crushing, unseen weight slam down upon the rest of his body. The sudden pressure forced the large student to his knees, his face contorting in agony as he cried out that his arm felt like it was breaking. Shocked by the sudden display of overwhelming force, the noble stammered, his previous arrogance faltering as he glared at the boy who had caused it. All traces of Elk's mild demeanor vanished, replaced by a chilling, dead-eyed stare. His voice dropped to a cold, menacing tone as he asked if they still wished to continue the fight. A bead of sweat rolled down the noble's cheek as the sheer intimidation washed over him. Swallowing his pride, he quickly declined the offer, turning away to retreat alongside his groaning lackey. As soon as the bullies were out of sight, the dark intensity melted from Elk's face, instantly replaced by a bright, cheerful smile. Clasping his hands together, he happily announced that it was finally time to eat. Later, the students gathered in a spacious, sunlit lecture hall. A sign by the door designated the room for the skill department's Year 1, Class F, where the new enrollees sat quietly at their tiered wooden desks, awaiting instruction. The older instructor, a man with a prominent mustache and round glasses, clears his throat at the front of the classroom. He introduces himself to the newly formed Class F as their homeroom teacher, Shikaraki. Leaning casually against his podium, Shikaraki instructs the students to begin their self-introductions. He suggests they share their names, origins, and skills, gesturing for the front row to start. The students take turns standing. A girl with long dark hair introduces herself as Shikiba Yado from Yamato. Immediately after, a boisterous, spiky-haired young man leaps up, proudly declaring himself as Gambo from the Log Kingdom, boasting of his future as a knight. When it is Elk's turn, he stands with a calm demeanor. He introduces himself and states his origin as the Deo Kingdom, openly revealing to the class that his innate skill is telekinesis. His open declaration immediately draws a scoff from Gambo. The spiky-haired student mocks the telekinetic ability, calling Elk a weakling and claiming that moving objects could never match a true combat skill. Unfazed, the young boy calmly acknowledges that while society generally considers his skill useless, he strongly disagrees. Intrigued by their sudden tension, Shikaraki leans forward on his desk, a sly smile crossing his face. He challenges Gambo directly, asking why he doesn't just fight his classmate to prove his point. The teacher explains that an upcoming martial arts tournament will determine the top students, making a practice match between the two a perfect learning experience. He officially grants them permission to duel. Adjusting his round glasses with a glint in his eye, Shikaraki notes that the two boys clearly have some personal grudges to settle anyway, letting the challenge hang in the air. Shortly after, the class relocates to the expansive, high-ceilinged academy training grounds. Gambo stretches, muttering to himself about how quickly things escalated, never having expected a mock battle on his very first day. Now clad in heavy, metallic combat armor, he steps onto the arena floor to face Elk, who remains in his standard uniform. Shikaraki crouches between them as the referee, asking if both combatants are ready. With Elk's calm confirmation and the armored student's eager shout to begin, the teacher prepares to signal the start of the match. He stood perfectly still, his expression unreadable, as the booming command to start shattered the tense silence of the arena. Beside him, the heavily armored Gambo grinned with predatory anticipation, raising his fists for a brutal clash. Unfazed by the towering warrior's bravado, the young telekinetic simply raised an open hand, ready to meet the incoming assault. The instructor's voice echoed through the arena as he threw his hand down, bellowing for the duel to begin. Across the stone floor, Noah and his heavily built opponent stood ready. A confident, aggressive smirk immediately spread across the scarred fighter's face, while the young boy maintained a cold, unwavering stare. Anticipating the clash, the larger student clenched his fist tight just as his opponent raised an open hand. Invoking his power first, the dark-haired boy shattered the stone floor beneath him, lifting massive slabs of debris into the air. Unfazed by the floating rubble, his scarred adversary charged forward with blinding speed, calling upon his own latent ability. In response, Noah unleashed his telekinesis with a sharp command, hurling the jagged boulders directly at the charging fighter. From the sidelines, the other students watched in stunned silence as the heavy projectiles closed in. But the boulders shattered harmlessly against the older student's skin. Roaring the name of his skill, he activated his steelification, boasting that his high-level ability turned his entire body into impenetrable iron as he plowed through the barrage. Realizing a direct assault was useless, the young boy quickly shifted tactics. As the ironclad fist swung toward him, he used his telekinesis on himself, launching his own body backward to narrowly evade the crushing blow. The heavy strike pulverized the ground where he had just stood. Standing amidst the settling dust, the scarred fighter taunted his evasive opponent, declaring that such weak attacks would never leave a scratch. He continued his mockery, laughing that running away would only delay the inevitable, and that no trick could pierce his iron defense. Landing gracefully a few paces away, the dark-haired boy simply raised his hand once more, his expression perfectly calm as he prepared his counterargument. He unleashed his power, conjuring a massive, roaring whirlwind that engulfed his opponent. Over the deafening roar of the gale, he questioned if the brute was truly certain of his invincibility. Watching the armored figure spin helplessly within the vortex, the young noble calculated his strategy. He reasoned that even if the man's exterior was solid iron, his internal organs remained fragilely human. Enough centrifugal force would inevitably take its toll. Just as predicted, the relentless spinning proved too much. The brute's consciousness faded, and, as the telekinetic hold released, his heavy, ironclad body plummeted toward the arena floor. The heavy thud of his landing echoed through the training hall. Recognizing the inevitable outcome of such extreme velocity, onlookers immediately rushed forward, urgently calling to carry the incapacitated student to the infirmary. Stepping up to the barrier, the mustached instructor raised his hands to officially declare the victor of the practice match. Assuming the duel was concluded, the young victor turned his back, ready to walk away. But the fight was not over. A grinding scrape of metal against stone drew his attention back, revealing his battered opponent stubbornly forcing himself upright, his body still encased in unyielding iron. Trembling with exhaustion and sheer willpower, the scarred youth gasped for air. Through gritted teeth, he forced out a desperate, fragmented declaration, vowing that he was the man destined to become a knight. His desperate words carried the weight of a harsh past. His memories drifted back to his origins in the log kingdom, a desolate, impoverished settlement nestled deep within a barren crater, where survival was a daily struggle. In that bleak world, his only beacon of hope had been a simple portrait resting on a modest altar. It depicted his father, a mere commoner who had somehow achieved the impossible rank of knighthood, a legacy that became the young boy's sole source of pride and inspiration. He recalled the days spent boasting to the other village children, his chest puffed out with innocent arrogance as he loudly proclaimed his father's greatness as a sworn protector of the realm. His memories drifted back to his childhood, where the other village boys would cruelly taunt him. They mocked his dreams, sneering that a knight was nothing more than a glorified servant to the king. Those insults always sparked a fury within him, leading to endless brawls in defense of his father's honor. Yet, despite the constant fighting, a turning point arrived when he crossed the threshold of his 10th year. He finally awakened his own unique skill, a moment of pure joy that made him believe he could truly follow in his father's footsteps. But that hope was quickly crushed by the harsh reality of the impoverished log kingdom, a desolate land that had no use for new nobility, demanding only mindless laborers to break rocks in the dust. Desperate to escape that dead-end fate, he fell to his knees before his weary father. He pleaded with every ounce of his soul for permission to leave their ruined home and study in the great nation of Gallatin. The older man knelt to meet his son's gaze, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. With a gentle voice, he agreed to send him to Gallatin, a sacrifice that the young boy immediately recognized the weight of. Looking closely at his father's scarred face and missing eye, he saw the true cost of loyalty. The man's hands were rougher and more battered than any common miner's, a silent testament to the immense sacrifices he had made for their ungrateful country. Carrying that heavy burden into his academy years, he swallowed his pride to honor his father's expectations. He forced himself to play the role of an obedient servant, standing quietly behind arrogant, worthless nobles. The humiliation didn't stop at mere servitude. He even resorted to brutal violence on their behalf, throwing punches he despised just to maintain his position. Every degrading act was a stepping stone toward his ultimate goal. The flood of memories ignited a roaring fire within his battered body, forcing him upright in the arena. Clad in heavy armor, he let out a deafening battle cry, declaring to the world that he would become a true knight. Across the battlefield, Noah stared in absolute disbelief at the towering figure. He realized with a shock that his opponent was completely unconscious, yet somehow still moving and activating his skills through sheer, unfathomable willpower, defying the devastating impact of the telekinetic strike. He stared at the battered, unyielding form before him, realizing that the towering student was no longer conscious. It wasn't a waking mind driving those battered limbs, but sheer, unadulterated willpower. This realization crystallized in his mind as a vision of a burning, fractured core, a manifestation of a singular, desperate desire to become a knight, fueled by every emotion and instinct etched into the boy's very soul. Moved by this profound display, he stepped deliberately toward his unresponsive opponent, ignoring the frantic shouts of the instructor demanding to know what he was doing. Closing the distance, he stopped mere inches from the hulking figure, looking up into eyes that were open but entirely vacant. Staring into that blank visage, he spoke softly, admitting his disdain for the brute's violent nature, yet acknowledging a deep, undeniable kinship in their shared desperation. His mind flashed back to his own grueling, endless training sessions, remembering the thousands of times his own body had reached its absolute limit against his sparring partners. What had kept his own exhausted limbs moving back, then, was a dark, unwavering thirst for revenge against those who had tormented him. Channeling that memory, he raised his hand, his expression hardening with resolve. Seeing the unconscious warrior still weakly raising a fist in a final, desperate show of fighting spirit, he knew there was only one way to truly honor such resolve. He drew his arms back, planting his feet firmly as he thrust both palms forward, gathering a massive surge of kinetic force. With a final, decisive shout, he unleashed a devastating shockwave directly into his opponent's chest, shattering the ground beneath them to bring the grueling match to its absolute end. The dust settles on the devastating aftermath of his final strike. A massive crater scars the arena floor, deep fissures spiderwebbing outward through the shattered stone. Above the ruined battleground, a dark-haired female student observes the destruction with a smirk, intrigued by the raw display of telekinesis. As other students scramble to call for a healing instructor, her hand rests on the hilt of her blade, her thoughts drifting to the thrill of finally finding an opponent worthy of her sword, Rokutan Mao. Meanwhile, in the quiet confines of the faculty office, the shockwaves of the duel have already reached the staff. A younger instructor questions Professor Shikaraki about the rumored sparring match. The older teacher sits heavily at his desk, utterly bewildered, admitting that the outcome is unlike anything he has witnessed in his entire teaching career. Shikaraki's mind races back to the unbelievable sight. A mere commoner standing victorious amidst the pulverized arena, having unleashed a skill of terrifying destructive power. Yet, equally astonishing was his opponent, who, despite being battered into unconsciousness, continued to instinctively react and trigger his own defensive abilities. Back in the spectator stands, the sheer scale of the first year's power leaves the upperclassmen buzzing with anticipation. A dark-haired boy, flanked by his peers, smiles eagerly, realizing that this new generation of students guarantees an incredibly entertaining year ahead. Heavy rain lashed against the academy windows, driving the student body indoors and packing the cafeteria to the brim. Navigating the bustling hall with his lunch tray, Noah scanned the crowd until he spotted his friends waving him over to an open table. As he approached the seats, he realized they weren't entirely empty. Fango sat at the edge of the group, his arms crossed defensively, letting out a sharp grunt of surprise as the dark-haired boy set his tray down opposite him. Reacting instantly to the casual greeting, the scarred youth snapped back, threatening the newcomer with death if he spoke another word. Completely ignoring the outburst, Noah cheerfully invited his nervous friends to sit down and eat, prompting Fango to bark another violent threat at the terrified trio, demanding they take their seats before he killed them too. He stiffened suddenly as a sycophantic voice echoed through the hall, calling out for Marcos. His eyes widened as he glanced over his shoulder to see the arrogant noble strolling through the cafeteria, flanked by his usual entourage. The haughty aristocrat halted right beside their table. One of his lackeys gestured toward an empty chair, his gaze landing squarely on the scarred student sitting just inches away, while Noah watched the exchange in silence. As he observed the tense standoff, the lackey loudly questioned his master about the identity of the crude, classless thug occupying the space. Without missing a beat, Marcos coldly replied that he wouldn't know someone of such low standing, his words causing Fango's eye to twitch with suppressed rage. Oblivious to his brewing anger, the noble threw his head back in a booming, theatrical laugh, declaring for all to hear that if he were in such a pathetic position, he would simply drop out of the academy on his own accord. Having delivered his stinging insult, he turned on his heel and strutted away with his followers in tow. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the table as the remaining students watched them leave, leaving the scarred youth staring blankly ahead. Sitting across from the humiliated student, Noah broke the quiet, his voice softening as he tentatively called out his classmate's name. Before he could finish his sentence, Fango lunged across the table, grabbing him by the collar of his uniform. His face was contorted in a desperate, defensive fury as he fiercely warned the dark-haired boy not to dare say anything comforting. Tightening his grip on the smaller boy's collar, he leans in close, his voice a low, threatening growl as he demands the noble shut up and get lost. His aggressive tirade is suddenly cut short. He turns his head, his scarred face twisting in a mix of confusion and rising fury as a voice from the surrounding crowd catches his attention, prompting him to demand what was just said. The provocation comes from a nearby student, who glares back with a dismissive sneer. The instigator casually insults the towering youth, urging Elk to simply finish him off. The single voice quickly multiplies into a chorus of mockery. Students surround the scarred brawler, jeering at his arrogance and demanding a repeat of his previous defeat. He recoils slightly, gritting his teeth as the insults rain down from every direction. The hostility escalates as another classmate screams that a brute like him could never become a knight. Still clutching the dark-haired boy's uniform, the towering youth glances back over his shoulder, completely surrounded by peers chanting for his immediate expulsion. Amidst the growing mob, a few voices attempt to restore order. Nick, Mary, and Shakiba step forward, their faces etched with concern as they desperately plead with their classmates to calm down and stop this senseless harassment. Their pleas are entirely drowned out by the deafening roar of the cafeteria. The entire student body seems to unite in a single, bloodthirsty chant, their voices echoing off the high ceilings as they relentlessly demand violence. Suddenly, the chaotic noise is severed. The dark-haired noble steps forward, his expression hardening as he thrusts his hand out. In an instant, an unseen force clamps down on the surrounding students, violently sealing their mouths shut and cutting off their chants. With the room finally quiet, he addresses the paralyzed crowd with cold authority. He expresses his absolute disgust at their cowardly behavior, challenging them to face the brawler themselves instead of barking orders, before firmly stating that his current conversation is strictly between him and his attacker. The once boisterous students are left standing in stunned silence. Wide-eyed and trembling, they clutch at their magically sealed lips, completely immobilized by the overwhelming display of power and the sudden shift in the room's dynamic. He cast a sharp glance over his shoulder, his grip still firm on the collar of the student he had subdued. With a cold, authoritative tone, he demanded that the rest of the cafeteria remain absolutely silent, ensuring they fully understood the gravity of his warning. Releasing his grip, the young lord adjusted his own collar with a sigh of relief, grateful for the sudden quiet. He then turned his attention back to the towering, scarred student, casually asking if he still had something to say. But the heavily built youth simply turned his back and began to walk away, gruffly dismissing him and stating he had absolutely nothing to say. Unfazed by the rejection, Noah turned back to his friends at the table. Apologizing for cutting their meal short, he announced he had urgent business to attend to and hurried off, ignoring their confused protest that he hadn't even eaten. Emma watches retreating back with a mix of concern and longing, calling out his name in vain. Her thoughts drifted back to a chilling vow he had made in the past, a promise that he would not return as a noble, but as an avenger. The memory of his intense, almost manic expression from that day flashed in her mind, a haunting image that had kept her constantly on edge ever since. As she watched him disappear down the hall, she reflected on her deep-seated fear. She had been terrified that the harsh environment of the academy would twist and corrupt the kindest person she had ever known. Yet, a gentle smile graced her lips as she realized the truth. Seeing him rush off out of genuine concern for another student brought her a profound sense of relief, proving that his compassionate heart remained intact. Outside, the weather had taken a dreary turn, with heavy rain pouring down relentlessly against the stone walls of the academy buildings. Amidst the downpour, Gumbo sat slumped against a wall, his clothes soaked through. He leaned his head back, staring up into the gray, unforgiving sky in silent contemplation. He sat drenched, wallowing in his own pathetic story. The harsh words of Marcos echoed in his mind, demanding he drop out and leave, mocking the very ambition that had brought him here to become a knight. Looking up through the downpour, he found Noah standing quietly before him. Defeated, he asked if the young lord agreed that he should just give up. Instead of answering, the young lord gently urged him to get out of the rain. This only ignited a spark of defensive anger in the soaked student, who snapped back, blaming Noah for mocking his introduction and proving his telekinesis useless during their mock battle. Unfazed by the outburst, Noah stepped closer, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain. He passionately declared that he knew exactly how much the older boy desired to be a knight, acknowledging the immense, undeniable effort he had poured into his dream. The sincerity in those words caught the older boy off guard. His anger faltered, replaced by a wary confusion as he demanded to know what Noah actually wanted from him, now that the truth was out in the open. In response, Noah reached out a hand through the falling rain, his palm open and steady. He offered a warm, earnest gaze, simply stating that he wanted reconciliation. The simple offer shattered his gloomy demeanor, sending him into a flustered panic. He sputtered in disbelief, loudly questioning why they would need to make up when they were never really friends to begin with, ultimately shouting to ask if Noah had lost his mind. Unbothered by the yelling, Noah kept his hand extended. He calmly explained that sharing a fair, serious battle was more than enough to forge a bond of friendship between them. Pressing his point, he noted that Marcos clearly cared nothing for him, making Noah a far better friend by comparison. The blunt, undeniable logic left the bruised student staring in stunned silence. He finally relented, clicking his tongue as he grasped the outstretched hand. Pulling the smaller boy to his feet, the brawler admitted he had been wrong to mock his telekinetic abilities. A fierce grin broke across his scarred face as he warned that their new friendship wouldn't earn his rival any mercy in their next bout. The young lord just laughed, promising to give it his all once again. With their rivalry settled into a newfound camaraderie, the two turned away from the battleground. The taller youth called out, suggesting they head back, and his new companion eagerly agreed as they walked side by side toward the academy buildings. Sometime later, within the bustling halls of the academy, the young lord caught his friend's attention. He pointed out a brightly decorated flyer pinned to the notice board, advertising the upcoming skill martial arts tournament. The brawler noted the intense wording hidden behind the cute, flashy design, prompting his companion to explain that it was one of the academy's 3 biggest annual events, organized with absolute dedication by the committee. Studying the details, the scarred youth observed that the initial stage was aimed at freshmen. While the solo matches posed no problem, the 3-person team battles presented a hurdle. The young lord immediately declared that they needed to find a 3rd member before the deadline, casually using his friend's nickname. The brawler blinked in surprise, suddenly realizing he had already been drafted into the team without a second thought. Leaving the notice board behind, the young lord wandered down a quiet corridor. His peaceful stroll was interrupted by the sound of familiar, haughty voices echoing from behind. A young girl's voice playfully asked her older brother for his opinion on the academy, to which a dismissive male voice replied that the place was unimpressive and filled with nobodies. The young lord froze, his eyes widening as he recognized the arrogant tones. Turning his head, his worst fears were confirmed. Striding confidently down the hallway were his estranged siblings, the second son and first daughter of his noble house. They walked with an air of absolute superiority, their pristine uniforms and arrogant postures a stark contrast to the surrounding students, completely oblivious to their outcast brother watching them from the shadows. The sight of them sent a jolt of pure shock through his system. His breath hitched, and his dark eyes dilated in a mixture of disbelief and deep-seated dread as the ghosts of his oppressive past suddenly materialized before him. As the 2 noble heirs continued their leisurely pace down the sunlit corridor, a chilling realization settled over the young outcast. The inevitable confrontation he had both dreaded and anticipated had finally arrived. His past had found him. Overwhelmed by the sudden influx of dark memories, he lowered his head, his fists trembling at his sides. The sheer intensity of his suppressed emotions began to manifest physically, his raw telekinetic power leaking out and violently buckling the metal lockers beside him with a series of sharp, metallic cracks. The destructive energy spiraled out of control, wrapping his entire body in a dense, suffocating aura of dark power. The very floor and walls of the academy groaned and fractured under the crushing weight of his presence as he muttered a venomous greeting to his estranged family, his eyes burning with a dangerous, newfound resolve. The hallway erupted into a chaotic storm of shattered stone and floating debris. At the epicenter stood Elk, enveloped in a dark, crackling aura of telekinetic energy, while Fango braced himself against the shockwave, staring down the corridor at the destruction. Sweat beaded on the scarred student's face as he shielded himself from the flying rubble. He shouted over the deafening roar, demanding to know what had suddenly come over his classmate, and questioning if Elk's powers had completely spiraled out of control. Desperation edged into his voice as he ordered Elk to stop. He realized with mounting dread that if the violent telekinetic storm continued at its current pace, the entire academy would be reduced to rubble. But the dark-haired boy offered no response. His eyes glowed with a blinding, empty white light, completely devoid of reason or consciousness, lost within the tempest of his own making. Realizing his opponent was completely unresponsive, Fango gritted his teeth and swore to wake him up by force. He urged Elk to hold on just a little longer as he prepared to unleash his own signature ability, calling upon his steelification. With a sharp, metallic crunch, the flesh of his right arm rapidly darkened and hardened, transforming into solid, impenetrable steel. He knew from their previous clash that a partially hardened limb would shatter instantly against the crushing pressure of the telekinesis. To even get close, he needed more than half-baked defenses. He had to condense his form and steelify his entire body. Dropping into a low, defensive crouch, he willed the metallic transformation to consume him entirely. He became a single, dense mass of iron, bracing every inch of his being to withstand the invisible, crushing weight of the psychic storm. Pushing through the barrier of raw energy, the steel-clad brawler closed the distance and delivered a brutal, point-blank headbutt straight to Elk's face, roaring for him to snap out of it. The sheer force of the impact sent both boys flying backward through the ruined corridor. As the dust settled, Fango lay battered and exhausted on the rubble, groaning about the ordeal, while Elk stood up slowly. The dark aura finally dissipated from his bewildered form. A week after his destructive outburst, he observed the Academy's training grounds, which buzzed with activity as students practiced mock battles and honed their abilities in the sprawling facility. Sitting on a bench overlooking the sparring areas, he turned to his imposing companion. With a lingering sense of guilt, he quietly asked if the larger boy was truly fully recovered. Gumbo brushed off the concern with a confident grin, explaining that the Academy's top-tier medical staff and advanced healing skills had him back to full health by the end of that very day. Despite the reassurance, Elk lowered his gaze, offering another quiet apology. His mind drifted back to the aftermath of the incident. He recalled waking up in his dorm room, where Emma and Nick had gently filled him in on the details, explaining how both he and Gumbo had been rushed to the infirmary for immediate treatment. To his surprise, the fallout had been minimal. The teachers hadn't scolded him severely, noting that skill rampages were a common occurrence among students their age, and the heavily damaged hallway had already been completely repaired. Returning to the present, he confessed his lingering shock. He admitted he never imagined he could lose control so completely, his voice heavy with remorse as he apologized to Gumbo once more. Rather than accepting the apology, Gumbo threw a heavy, friendly arm around his shoulders. With a wide, encouraging smile, he corrected the young noble, insisting that thank you was the proper phrase, as that was simply what friends said to each other. Later, sitting across from Nick at a small table, the conversation shifted. Nick agreed with Gumbo's sentiment, urging him not to worry about the past, and quickly pivoted to their pressing objective for the day, finding a teammate for the upcoming martial arts tournament. The event was a major Academy tradition held 3 times a year, featuring new student matches, interior bouts, and end-of-year clashes for the Combat Skill Department. It ran alongside the Commerce Department's Skill Arts Festival, a bustling showcase of student-made goods that attracted nobles and famous merchants alike. Fully aware of the stakes and the task ahead, he nodded firmly, his expression hardening with renewed focus as he acknowledged the challenge. His search for a third teammate began with disappointment. Shakiba politely declined their invitation, explaining that she simply had no interest in participating in team matches. The rejection continued shortly after. Mary also turned them down flat, waving off the idea as far too much of a hassle to even consider. With their top 2 candidates having turned them down, Elk and Nick sat dejectedly on a nearby staircase, realizing they had to keep looking. Their quiet contemplation was suddenly interrupted by a sharp shout directed at them from across the courtyard. Startled, the 2 boys looked up just in time to see a massive, heavy sphere hurtling directly toward them. Panic flashed across Nick's face as he yelled for them to run. Instead of fleeing, Elk calmly stood his ground and raised a single hand. With a dull thud, he caught the massive projectile mid-air, stopping its momentum completely and leaving the surrounding students staring in stunned silence. The source of the attack was a short-haired girl training nearby, manipulating multiple heavy spheres. She casually asked what they were doing, just sitting around, prompting Nick to realize this wasn't just self-training. She was actively tracking the spheres with her eyes, preparing for something more intense. Before the girl could finish her thought, a challenger burst into the arena with blinding speed. A nimble fighter with twin tails dashed forward, declaring the start of their match as she zipped past the heavy spheres, leaving her opponent scrambling to locate her. In a desperate counterattack, the sphere user launched a rapid barrage of projectiles, confident they couldn't be dodged. However, the agile fighter simply leaped into the air, twisting and weaving through the deadly volley with effortless grace. Closing the distance in the blink of an eye, the swift challenger caught her opponent completely off guard. With a fierce shout, she delivered a devastating, high-speed kick directly to the girl's midsection. The match ended instantly, the defeated girl collapsing to her knees as the victor stood over her with a bright, confident smile, praising the bout. From the sidelines, Elk and Nick analyzed the brief fight, noting that the winner hadn't just relied on raw speed, but had executed her takedown with absolute, minimal movement. He watched as the agile fighter landed gracefully before him and Nick, her cheeks flushed with a bright, energetic smile. She playfully admitted that all their praise was making her blush. Catching them slightly off guard, she quickly introduced herself, noting that they were all first-year students. She added that she was from Class B, her demeanor friendly and entirely unbothered by the sudden encounter. Her excitement bubbled over as she leaned in close, practically invading their personal space. She enthusiastically praised their earlier display, specifically marveling at the skill used to stop the heavy wrecking ball dead in its tracks. Without pausing for breath, she bombarded the dark-haired boy with rapid-fire questions. She speculated wildly about his abilities, guessing he must be in the physical enhancement category or possess some special magic, convinced that his base physique had to be incredibly strong to pull off such a feat. Overwhelmed by her intense curiosity, he simply turned his back, muttering to Nick that they should find another training ground before things got too weird. Undeterred, the girl giggled, playfully challenging if they really thought they could outrun her. To prove her point, she invoked a skill called acceleration. In a blur of motion, she instantly closed the distance, reappearing directly in their path and cutting off their escape route. A confident smirk played across her lips as she proudly declared that speed was her ultimate skill, boasting that absolutely no one could match her pace. Leaning in close once more, she demanded a fair exchange. Since she had openly revealed her own ability, she insisted that he owed her the truth about his. Meeting her eager gaze with a completely deadpan expression, he plainly stated that his skill was simply telekinesis. The revelation caught her off guard, replacing her confident smile with a look of utter confusion. Refusing to accept such a mundane answer, she immediately accused him of lying. She argued that there was no way he could have performed such incredible feats with mere telekinesis, convinced he was trying desperately to keep his true powers secret, while he calmly maintained his stance. She watched as the tall, muscular student stepped forward, crossing his arms defensively. He firmly vouched for his dark-haired companion, insisting that the boy was telling the truth. Amused by the sudden defense, she conceded, playfully noting that if the muscle guy believed him, she would too. She then eagerly offered to join their training session, openly admiring their physiques, much to the muscular student's confusion. Unswayed by her enthusiasm, the tall student flatly rejected her offer, his expression deadpan. Brushing off the rejection with a bright smile, she cheerfully noted that they weren't there to train anyway, leaving the dark-haired boy bewildered by her sudden shift in logic. Leaning in closer, she confidently laid out her true proposition, asking if they were looking for a third member to join their team for the upcoming martial arts tournament. She didn't hesitate to boast, declaring herself the strongest and fastest student currently in the training hall. She reasoned that teaming up with their impressive strength would guarantee an easy victory for all of them. Considering her bold claim, the muscular student leaned down to whisper to his companion. He admitted that, despite her strange obsession with muscles, her speed and power in the previous match made her a highly balanced and capable recruit. Taking their whispered deliberation as an agreement, she threw her arms wide and excitedly declared the matter settled. As she asked for their names, the two boys finally introduced themselves as Elk and Gumbo. Thrilled by the introductions, she struck a dramatic pose, her fists clenched in excitement. She proclaimed their meeting to be an act of fate, eagerly rallying Elk and Gumbo to do their best together. Overwhelmed by her relentless energy, Gumbo offered a hesitant, sweating polite reply, while Elk simply stared in mild disbelief at their boisterous new teammate. Arriving at the bustling reception hall, the trio found themselves facing a massive crowd of freshman applicants. Surveying the long line, the scarred brawler noted the sheer volume of participants, while the dark-haired boy realized that since the tournament was optional for their year, every single student present must be highly confident in their own abilities. Unfazed by the intense competition, the muscular youth threw his arms wide and roared his absolute certainty that their squad would be the ones standing victorious at the top of the podium. His loud declaration immediately drew menacing glares from nearby upperclassmen. The dark-haired boy sighed, questioning why his teammate felt the need to needlessly provoke the entire room, only to be casually brushed off and told to handle the angry onlookers himself. Turning away from the brewing trouble, he watched as other students mingled and sized each other up, listening to a massive upperclassman politely decline an individual match in favor of the team battles. The sheer level of enthusiasm in the room gave him pause. Looking down at his own paperwork, he reflected on how highly everyone in the skill department thought of their own combat prowess this year. His thoughts then drifted to his estranged family. A dark shadow crossed his mind as he wondered if his arrogant older siblings would also be participating in the upcoming clashes. Staring at the application bearing the faces of his two new friends, a cold resolve settled over him. If his siblings were indeed entering, this tournament would serve as the perfect stage for his long-awaited revenge, though he silently vowed to keep his innocent teammates out of his personal vendetta. Completely lost in his dark plotting, he failed to watch where he was going and collided hard with the back of another student, immediately stammering out a flustered apology. The young man he had bumped into turned around gracefully, his wavy hair shifting as he looked down at the startled boy. Instead of anger, the upperclassman offered a warm, reassuring smile, waving off the apology. The dark-haired boy's eyes widened in sudden recognition, realizing he had just bumped into the very same confident representative who had delivered the speech at their entrance ceremony. He quickly tried to mask his surprise, but the crown prince saw right through him. With a knowing smile, Elwood noted that the young man's expression practically screamed confusion as to why royalty would be standing in a mundane line. The dark-haired student hastily denied the accusation. Brushing off the denial with a light-hearted laugh, the prince explained his unusual predicament. He confessed that back at the palace, servants handled every trivial task, leaving him eager to experience the simple novelty of waiting in a long queue to submit his own paperwork. Glancing down at the documents in the royal's hand, no one noticed two distinct forms. Curiosity piqued, he asked if the prince was planning to enter the individual matches as well as the team battles. Elwood confirmed the observation with a cheerful nod, pointing out that his new acquaintance was clearly planning to do the exact same thing. Shifting the topic as they moved forward in line, the prince casually inquired about the state of Noah's team. The young student admitted that while their coordination was far from flawless, they were united by a singular, driving ambition. That shared goal, he declared with unwavering intensity, was absolute victory. The sheer conviction in his voice caught Elwood's attention, prompting a subtle, intrigued smile from the royal. Their conversation was interrupted by a clerk calling for the next applicant. Realizing it was his turn, Elwood excused himself, but not before complimenting the fierce determination burning in Noah's eyes, taking it as proof of a formidable team. The prince stepped up to the registration desk, resting his hand on the counter as he prepared to submit his forms. However, he paused, tossing a confident warning over his shoulder. He advised his rival not to get too comfortable, boasting that his own squad featured the Academy's greatest swordsman and magician. With a casual wave of his hand, Elwood departed, leaving behind a promise that he was eagerly anticipating the moment their teams would inevitably clash in the tournament arena. As the confident prince strode away down the corridor, Noah watched him go in silence, leaning thoughtfully against the railing. His attention soon drifted to a group of students gathered further down the hall, wondering to himself if his teammates were still busy finalizing their tournament applications. A familiar voice broke his train of thought as Mary approached, cheerfully calling out his name. He turned to greet her, mildly surprised by her sudden arrival. He then noticed the dark-haired girl standing beside her. After a moment of hesitation, he recognized her as Shikibiyato, a quiet student from his own class. The dark-haired girl ignored the pleasantries, her gaze fixed intently on Mary. She bluntly questioned the blonde student's claim of being a katana wielder, prompting a defensive, confused response. Leaning in uncomfortably close, she hardened her expression. She coldly stated that Mary simply didn't carry the scent of a true warrior. She elaborated with chilling precision, noting the complete absence of the scent of blood. She accused Mary of never having taken a life or faced genuine, mortal danger, leaving the blonde girl utterly bewildered and offended. With a subtle glance toward the hilt of her own blade, the grim warrior delivered a warning. She insisted that treating swordplay as a mere hobby would only lead to a swift death, urging Mary to withdraw her tournament application immediately. Pushed past her breaking point, the blonde student stepped back and furiously gripped her sword, challenging her critic to a duel right then and there to prove her skills weren't just for show. Before the situation could escalate into violence, Noah stepped between them, placing a firm, calming hand on his teammate's shoulder and reminding her that drawing a weapon in the crowded hallway was strictly forbidden. She reluctantly released her grip on the hilt, her anger simmering down into a frustrated pout as she yielded to Noah's reasoning. She met the challenge with a fierce glare, declaring that the upcoming tournament would prove whether her blade was merely decorative. Unfazed, the dark-haired swordswoman turned on her heel. Over her shoulder, she casually expressed her anticipation of crossing blades with Elk, completely dismissing the girl's fiery retort. Left standing in the hallway, the young boy let out an exasperated sigh, utterly bewildered as to why he had suddenly become the target of her competitive focus. Beside him, his companion kept her head bowed, the sting of the dismissal lingering. Her knuckles whitened as she clenched her fist, the realization washing over her that she wasn't even considered a worthy opponent. Sensing her frustration, he gently advised her not to let such a cheap taunt get under her skin. Instead of answering, she simply turned and walked away in silence, leaving him to call out after her retreating figure in surprise. Watching the two girls depart in opposite directions, he realized that the upcoming tournament was drawing out more than just simple rivalries. It was clear he wasn't the only one entering the competition with hidden motives. Meanwhile, in a grander wing of the academy, the crown prince strode confidently down a sunlit corridor. He announced his return, confirming that he had successfully submitted their application for the team matches. Awaiting him were the two Kinesis siblings, the young blonde girl and her sharp-eyed brother, standing ready in the hall. The young noblewoman politely protested, insisting that the prince shouldn't have troubled himself with such errands when she could have sent her own associates. With a dismissive wave of his hand, he brushed off her concern, asserting that within the academy walls, he was just another student. A knowing smile touched his lips as he added that the errand had been worthwhile. During his trip, he had crossed paths with a rather interesting and capable freshman. He offered a knowing smile, his curiosity piqued. The idea that a mere freshman had managed to capture the attention of a prodigy known for mastering 3 distinct skills was an intriguing prospect indeed. The young Kinesis boy beamed with enthusiastic confirmation. Beside him, the prince and the boy's older sister exchanged thoughtful glances, silently weighing the implications of this unexpected rival. Undeterred by their silent contemplation, the young swordsman puffed out his chest. He proudly declared that with his own unparalleled genius with a blade, combined with his sister's mastery over saintly magic, their team was an unstoppable force. Throwing his arms wide in a grand, theatrical gesture, he marched forward down the corridor. With the prince backing them up, he proclaimed that their victory in the upcoming tournament was already an absolute certainty. Meanwhile, the sprawling expanse of the academy's training hall echoed with the sounds of combat. Across the vast, sunken arenas, students pushed themselves to their limits in preparation for the trials ahead. Along the elevated viewing gallery, a group of trainees paused their own regiments. They leaned over the railing, their attention captivated by a particularly intense sparring match unfolding below, marveling at the sheer ferocity on display so close to the tournament start. Down in the ring, the tension was palpable. A heavy boot planted firmly against the stone floor, followed instantly by the tight, leather-creaking clench of a gauntlet fist. The armored warrior braced himself, just as his agile opponent launched a blistering aerial assault. She drove a powerful kick into his raised guard, prompting him to question if her heavy boots were specialized weapons, noting her surprising proficiency in close-quarters martial arts. Rebounding gracefully from the impact, the nimble fighter explained that a lifetime of brawling had honed her skills. The armored man grumbled in annoyance at her relentless pace, but she merely smirked, warning him that she would exploit any opening he dared to leave. They lunged toward each other for another devastating clash, but a sharp, authoritative command suddenly echoed across the arena. An instructor stepped forward, his hand raised, instantly halting their fierce momentum before another blow could be struck. Sitting on a nearby bench, Elk raised a hand to calm his teammates, reminding them that they were only in a training match and had an audience. He advised against revealing all their techniques so soon. The armored warrior conceded the point, relaxing his stance, before suddenly realizing something was missing. He turned back to Elk, questioning the whereabouts of his combat gear. The dark-haired boy blinked, admitting that he hadn't given it much thought, though he noted their attire was rather unusual. The armored youth stared back in disbelief, explaining that their clothing was specifically tailored to their unique abilities. He detailed how his own lightweight outfit accommodated his body's transformation into armor, while the agile fighter nearby added that her custom gloves and boots were necessary to withstand the intense wear and tear of her combat style. A look of mild realization washed over his face as he confessed he had prepared absolutely nothing special for the upcoming tournament. The armored warrior recoiled in shock, loudly demanding to know what he planned to wear into the arena. Unfazed by the outburst, Elk simply replied that he would wear whatever was easiest to move around in. The armored youth threw his hands up, exasperated by the mental image of his teammate standing victorious on the grand podium dressed in nothing but a plain t-shirt and track pants. Elk merely shrugged off the concern, pointing out that it was too late to commission anything now. Before the argument could escalate further, a polite, urgent voice called out from across the hall. Footsteps echoed as a young woman hurried toward the group, coming to a halt as she caught her breath. She looked directly at Elk, relieved to have finally tracked him down after being pointed in his direction by Mary. Still panting slightly from her sprint, she announced that she had an urgent matter to discuss with him. Clenching her fists in front of her chest to gather her courage, the dark-haired student locked eyes with him. With a mix of determination and nervous energy, she boldly declared that she had a specific favor to ask. High above, the sky is clear, framed by the towering stone pillars of the arena. The massive columns reach toward the clouds, encircling the grand stadium where the day's events are set to unfold. Down at the central podium, flanked by floating, diamond-shaped artifacts, a voice echoes through the grounds, testing the amplification before apologizing for the delay and calling the assembly to order. From a high vantage point, the vast arena floor is revealed, packed with neat, disciplined formations of students as the booming voice officially declares the start of the opening ceremony. The unseen announcer then yields the floor, introducing the highly anticipated opening speech from an elder figure waiting in the wings. Stepping up to the microphone, the elderly headmaster clears his throat, his voice carrying across the silent crowd as he promises to keep his remarks brief, admitting his distaste for long-winded speeches. With a warm, reassuring smile, he encourages the competitors to fight with everything they have, assuring them that any injuries will be swiftly handled by their esteemed medical staff. He abruptly concludes his speech, leaving the announcer scrambling to introduce the next guest. As the elder steps aside, the announcer recovers, formally introducing the tournament's chief medical officer to the waiting crowd. Taking his place, a striking woman approaches the microphone, her presence commanding immediate respect. Clad in a pristine white uniform and a distinctive, structured headdress, she is announced as a doctor of the 5 stars, the renowned Dr. Nightingale. Her commanding presence sends a ripple of awe through the gathered students. Whispers break out among the ranks as they marvel at her arrival, murmuring in disbelief that a healer of her caliber, possessing the absolute highest S-rank skills, is overseeing their tournament. Standing at the podium, the esteemed doctor commanded the room's attention. In the crowd, Nick leaned over to Mary, whispering in awe about her legendary reputation as one of the 5 stars, renowned for her unparalleled medical prowess. Continuing her address, she projected her voice across the vast hall. She confirmed the headmaster's bold claim, assuring the students that any injury sustained in the tournament, even death itself, could be completely healed within a single day. The sheer weight of her words sent a visible ripple of shock through the gathered students. Nick and Mary exchanged nervous glances, bracing themselves as the doctor prepared to deliver her final, chilling point. Looking down at the assembly with an icy, unyielding gaze, she delivered her grim encouragement. Because of her presence, she declared, every participant was free to fight without holding back, urging them to embrace the brutal lessons born from pain, despair, and even death itself. Having delivered her harrowing message, she turned and descended the grand staircase of the stage. An academy instructor stepped forward to meet her, offering a respectful nod and commending her on the address. She paused beside the elderly leader, quietly questioning if her harsh words had been entirely appropriate for the opening ceremony. The headmaster merely smiled through his thick white beard, confident that her stark warning was exactly what the students needed to brace themselves, whether they were standing in the main hall or watching from the remote waiting rooms. His voice echoed through the cavernous auditorium, carrying the heavy reality of the tournament to every corner of the academy. Far from the grand stage, the broadcast of the ceremony played on a monitor inside one of the designated waiting areas. Several students watched the screen intently, absorbing the chilling reality of the trials ahead. Among them, the heavily built youth named Fango scowled, cursing their luck for being relegated to a remote room instead of attending in person. Beside him, an agile female fighter calmly reasoned that it couldn't be helped. With over 100 teams competing, only the elite squads with noble backing were granted the privilege of standing in the main hall. Before he could argue further, the sharp, heavy thud of a boot stepping forward cut through the tension in the room, signaling an imminent arrival. Nick and the armored warrior wait anxiously, wondering if their teammate will arrive in time. Their conversation is cut short as a cloaked figure approaches from behind, calling out to them. The figure steps forward, revealing himself as Elk. His lower face is concealed by a dark mask beneath a heavy hood, and he offers a calm apology for the delay. Nick's eyes widen with excitement at the striking new attire, while the armored warrior simply expresses relief that he made it. Beside Elk, Emma stands quietly as he explains that the final adjustments to his gear took longer than anticipated. The mention of these adjustments triggers a memory of an urgent request made just a short time ago. In the memory, Noah stands in the academy hallway, looking at a breathless Emma. He gently asks her what is wrong and what kind of favor she needs from him. Catching her breath, she explains that she had heard from Mary about his lack of proper combat attire for the upcoming tournament, prompting her to rush over immediately. Her cheeks flush with a mix of nervousness and determination as she boldly offers to use her sewing skills to craft his battle outfit, hoping he will allow her the honor. Overjoyed, Noah eagerly grasps both of her hands, his face lighting up as he accepts her offer and tells her he is counting on her. His enthusiastic response sends Emma into a flustered frenzy. She loudly declares her absolute dedication, offering to do whatever it takes to help, while Nick and the armored warrior watch her sudden outburst with bewildered expressions. The memory fades back to the present, where Elk tests the mobility of his new gear. As Emma nervously asks about the fit, he flexes his arm, thoroughly impressed by how sturdy yet incredibly light the custom outfit feels. He listened as the energetic martial artist, Finn, proudly claimed responsibility for the suit's remarkable material. She explained that the super light, incredibly tough fabric was a special fiber shipped directly from her homeland, the martial nation of Bard. Beaming with pride, she added that she had brought extra material from her family's dojo, thrilled that it was finally being put to good use. He softly acknowledged her contribution, touched by the gesture. Shifting the focus back to the fitting, Emma instructed him to test the suit's mobility by stretching out both arms. He complied, extending his limbs to gauge the flexibility of the dark fabric. Suddenly, with a sharp metallic click, a sleek blade sprang forth from a concealed mechanism in his wrist guard, catching him completely off guard. Recovering from his surprise, he questioned the origin of the hidden weapon. Stepping forward with a confident grin, the towering Gumbo proudly claimed it as his own gift, boasting that while his homeland might lack many things, their steel was absolutely second to none. The muscular warrior elaborated, declaring the blade was forged from the highest quality iron, completely impervious to cheap knockoffs. Looking up at his imposing friend from beneath his new hood, the young swordsman quietly spoke his name in gratitude. Inspecting the concealed weapon and the dark mask covering his lower face, he realized the aggressive, stealthy design felt entirely uncharacteristic of Emma's usual gentle style. Confirming his suspicions, Emma excitedly revealed her inspiration. She explained that while researching agile combat outfits in the library, someone had advised her to base the design on the assassin class from the Yamato Kingdom. He immediately pictured the sleek, dark-haired swordswoman who must have given her the idea. Her enthusiastic smile softened into a look of earnest concern. She confessed that while she hated the thought of him carrying dangerous weapons, she was determined to do everything in her power to support him, leaving absolutely no room for regrets. Leaning in close, she whispered her final, most crucial reason for the design. The mask and hood were essential to conceal his identity, ensuring no one would recognize his face from his past life in the Dao Kingdom. He marveled at the intricate details of his new attire, realizing how much thought she had poured into every stitch to conceal his identity. A voice from behind interrupted his thoughts, reminding him that others had pitched in as well. Turning around, he found Nick and Mary approaching. Nick cheerfully announced that the combat outfit had come together flawlessly. Mary chimed in, her expression turning serious as she explained her role. Leveraging her position as an heir to the Merchant Guild, she had meticulously managed the budget, while Nick had handled the complex material costs. Despite their invaluable help, the young swordsman knew who bore the brunt of the work. He looked toward the center of the room, softly acknowledging that Emma had undoubtedly worked the hardest to bring the design to life. Hearing his words, the young girl's eyes widened in mild surprise before softening into a gentle smile. She humbly brushed off the praise, insisting that she had only done what she truly wanted to do. Overwhelmed by her kindness, he pulled down his mask, his face lighting up with a bright, genuine smile. Alongside his friends, he voiced a loud, heartfelt thank you, letting his sincere appreciation wash over her. The sheer warmth of their gratitude struck a deep chord within her. Her breath hitched as her large eyes suddenly welled up with unexpected tears, the emotional weight of the moment catching her completely off guard. Quickly raising her arm to wipe her face, she tried to compose herself. Her voice trembled slightly as she confessed that she was the one who should be thankful, grateful for the long-awaited opportunity to finally return the favor he had shown her. Seeing her cry, the rest of the group immediately turned on the young assassin. His friends crowded around him, playfully teasing him and calling him a heartbreaker, while he frantically waved his hands, bewildered and loudly protesting his innocence. Watching their playful bickering, she let out a soft laugh, her tears now flowing from pure joy. With a radiant smile, she reassured them that she wasn't sad at all, feeling incredibly blessed to be surrounded by such wonderful friends. She beamed with pure joy, her eyes crinkling as she declared how incredibly glad she was to have enrolled at the academy. Beside her, Noah returned her warm smile, wholeheartedly agreeing that he felt exactly the same way. Their peaceful moment was abruptly interrupted when a classmate leaned around the corner, calling out to Nick and the rest of the team battle participants. The student urgently informed them that the officials were about to explain the rules for the upcoming flag battle. As the participants gathered, a masked figure in a dark cloak stood among the crowd, his eyes widening in sudden surprise. Over the loudspeaker, an announcer's voice boomed across the hall, declaring that before the rules were laid out, the representative team would first make their official vow. Following the announcement, 3 imposing figures stepped forward into the spotlight. Elwood, clad in polished armor, led the way alongside the haughty Sarisa and the heavily armored Rashuo, as their full names and titles were grandly called out for all to hear. A metallic voice echoed from the floating broadcast devices, declaring the tournament's primary objective. At the podium, Crown Prince Elwood projected absolute confidence. He swore a public oath, declaring that the competitors would fight with unwavering honor and integrity. Behind him, Sarisa and Rashuo Kinesis stood as a silent, imposing vanguard. The 2 Kinesis siblings finished the royal pledge in unison, promising to uphold those noble values until the bitter end. Yet, the haughty, knowing smirks on their faces betrayed a different kind of confidence. Below the stage, the gathered crowd of academy students watched in tense silence, absorbing the weight of the royal declaration. Far from the cheering masses, Elk watched the spectacle intently. His eyes narrowed beneath the shadow of his dark hood and concealing mask. His leather-clad fist clenched tightly at his side. He scoffed at the prince's grand words. The promise of honor and integrity felt like a bitter, hollow joke considering the 2 ruthless siblings standing right behind the royal. His brooding was interrupted as Fango crossed his heavily armored arms. The scarred brawler leaned in, his sharp eyes narrowing as he bluntly pointed out that something felt entirely off about his masked teammate's demeanor. Finn popped into his field of vision with a bright, teasing smile, playfully asking if the grand stage was making him nervous. She cheerfully reminded him that their squad was fully prepared and freshly equipped with their new battle gear. Fango clapped a heavy, armored hand onto Elk's shoulder, his aggressive features breaking into a fierce, confident grin. With booming enthusiasm, he declared that the only thing left for them to do was secure a total victory. Beneath the heavy disguise, Noah's mind cleared as he realized that despite their differences, the 3 of them shared the exact same goal. Letting out a soft, resigned sigh, Elk accepted that these 2 eccentric teammates were the only people he could truly trust in the coming trials. As the trio turned to face the arena, the announcer's voice boomed once more, finally calling for the tournament rules to commence. He listened intently as a voice echoed across the vast arena stage, drawing the crowd's attention to the central podium where the rules for the upcoming flag battle were about to be declared. The speaker was none other than their familiar instructor, Shikaraki, who cleared his throat before announcing that the rules would be simple. Raising his arm to display a specialized wristband, the instructor explained that each team would receive one, and their primary objective was to capture the flags of their rivals. He elaborated on the grueling conditions, setting a strict 7-hour time limit. To earn the right to advance to the final round, a team needed to secure a total of 3 flags. The mechanics of the battle were ruthless. The instructor clarified that flags could only be claimed if an opponent was completely incapacitated or knocked unconscious, effectively dividing the competitors into victors who moved forward and the defeated who were banished to the waiting room. Pausing for a brief moment, he added a grim caveat. Competitors were also permitted to scavenge flags from those who had already fallen in combat. Down in the staging area, the disguised swordsman and his newly formed team absorbed the instructions, standing ready as the instructor dismissed them to proceed to the battle arena. With the briefing concluded, the trio finalized their preparations. The agile fighter stretched her limbs while the swordsman adjusted his dark cloak, their focus briefly interrupted when a familiar voice called out from the sidelines. Nick, accompanied by Mary and another classmate, enthusiastically wished the trio good luck, promising to cheer them on. The agile fighter beamed at the strong show of support, while the swordsman offered a quiet nod of acknowledgement. As the team turned to head into the fray, Mary's cheerful expression faltered into a look of quiet concern, her eyes lingering on the imposing, silent figure of the armored warrior as he marched toward the battlefield. The imposing warrior suddenly stopped and bowed deeply before the group, his voice heavy with regret as he offered a sincere apology. Mary blinked in surprise, wondering if this sudden display of humility was about the recent incident. Keeping his gaze fixed firmly on the floor, he confessed that his behavior when they first met had been utterly disgraceful. He admitted he didn't expect their forgiveness, but felt compelled to make amends. Mary stared down at his lowered head as he continued, his tone resolutely stubborn. He insisted that without offering this apology, he had absolutely no right to accept their support in the trials ahead. Watching the scene unfold, Elk's eyes softened beneath his dark hood. He murmured the large boy's name, clearly moved by the unexpected vulnerability. Before the silence could stretch, Nick stepped forward with a gentle smile, instructing him to raise his head. He reassured his teammate that supporting a friend was simply the natural thing to do, especially for someone close to Elk. A quiet, heartfelt expression of gratitude echoed across the tiled floor, sealing the newfound bond between them. Just then, Finn and Shakiba caught up to the group, completely bewildered by the sight. Finn whispered in confusion, struggling to process the image of the usually aggressive brawler bowing his head to anyone. The display of camaraderie struck a deep chord within Elk. Beneath his mask, a shadow of doubt crept into his mind as he questioned his own path, wondering if he could truly fight alongside these genuine friends while still harboring a dark thirst for revenge. Without another word, the heavy-set warrior turned and walked down the corridor alongside Nick, leaving the rest of the team to watch their retreating backs in thoughtful silence. Breaking the quiet, the masked youth finally spoke up, his voice steady but carrying a weight of unresolved tension as he addressed the remaining members of his team. He reached out, his hand extending toward his teammates just as the world around them began to shift. In the blink of an eye, the familiar surroundings vanished, replaced by the towering, shadowed canopy of a dense forest. Disoriented, the cloaked youth stumbled slightly, his gaze darting across the unfamiliar terrain before settling on a strange new device fastened to his arm. His confusion was cut short as Nick and Mary rushed to his side, relieved to find him nearby. Glancing back at the rest of his assembled team, he realized the flag had been the catalyst for their sudden displacement. A quiet intensity settled over him. The long-awaited trial had finally begun. They stood at the edge of a sprawling, seemingly endless expanse of greenery. This was the stage for the first round of the martial arts tournament, a flag battle arena set within the formidable forest-type dungeon known as the Great Sea of Trees, Philo's Forest. The vast ocean of foliage stretched out beneath the sunlight, a silent, imposing labyrinth waiting to test their mettle. Breaking the silence, Nick eagerly suggested they simply hunt down an enemy team and crush them, but Mary quickly interjected, warning that charging in without a solid plan was a fool's errand. As his teammates debated their next move, the cloaked leader turned away, wrestling with a heavy internal burden. He questioned whether he should reveal his true objective to them now, fearing that such a revelation might only sow confusion in the midst of a critical match. Yet, as the faces of his impending targets flashed in his mind, his resolve hardened. If they were truly going to face Rashuo and Sarisa in this team battle, he knew he had no choice but to confess the truth. His eyes widened in sudden alarm as a volley of sharp, metallic spikes tore through the forest canopy, hurtling directly toward him. Before the projectiles could strike, Finn blurred into motion. Channeling her acceleration skill, she dashed in front of him, her blades flashing to deflect the barrage. However, the sheer speed of the ambush overwhelmed her defenses, and a spike grazed her shoulder, drawing a sharp gasp of pain. Watching her stumble, he cursed his own delayed reaction. Instantly, Gumbo stepped into the line of fire to shield his injured teammate. With a heavy stomp, he activated his steelification ability, his skin hardening into an impenetrable metallic armor as more spikes rained down, bouncing harmlessly off his reinforced body. Without looking back, he barked an order for the swordsman to ready his telekinesis. A fierce, predatory grin spread across the armored giant's face. He taunted their unseen assailants, mocking their audacity for aiming straight at the team's leader. Clutching her bleeding arm, Finn quickly analyzed the trajectory of the assault. She deduced that the enemy possessed a specialized long-range skill, firing from significant distance to remain hidden. Nodding in agreement, the cloaked leader confirmed that their first priority was to pinpoint the sniper's exact location. Guilt gnawed at him as he glanced down, his fists clenching at the realization that his own carelessness had cost his teammate her safety. Pushing the regret aside, he raised a communication sphere to his mouth, urgently requesting a status update on the enemy's appraisal. High above the forest floor, concealed within the dense foliage of a massive tree branch, two figures observed the chaos they had just unleashed. Crouched low against the bark, a young scout peered through the leaves. He quietly confirmed to his companion that he had a clear line of sight on their targets. Adjusting a specialized monocle over his right eye, the scout relayed his tactical analysis. He reported that the large defender steelification skill was currently at level 19, noting with a hint of relief that the ability had not yet evolved to a more dangerous tier. Standing tall beside him, Marcos Paisley absorbed the intelligence with a smug, arrogant smirk. He instructed the scout to keep the other two pinned down while they were distracted. Brimming with overconfidence, the young noble declared his intention to personally test the limits of their leader's rumored telekinesis, absolutely certain that victory already belonged to his team. Long ago, a skill was nothing more than a crude method to fortify the physical body. Yet, as humanity evolved, these abilities fractured and multiplied, blossoming into thousands of unique variations. Within the grand arenas where these powers are tested, skills are meticulously categorized into three primary pillars: rank, class, and level. The first pillar, rank, spans a rigid hierarchy from G up to the pinnacle of S. At the absolute zenith sit the 5 stars, an elite cadre of 5 individuals, including the venerated headmaster and the esteemed Dr. Nightingale, whose unparalleled abilities earn them the exclusive S-rank classification. The elderly headmaster watches silently from his seat, his gaze fixed intently on the figures standing before the vast testing grounds. Down in the arena, the second pillar, class, is put on display. Among the 4 primary classes is the magic skill, the power to manifest raw mana into destructive elements, forcing the heavily armored Gumbo to leap back as jagged roots erupt from the earth. Another combatant demonstrates the weapon skill, channeling energy to enhance their blade and unleash a devastating shockwave that shatters the ground. Meanwhile, Gumbo prepares his own defense. He clenches his fist tight, planting his boot firmly into the dirt as a pulsating aura of energy flares around him. A barrage of high-speed projectiles hurtles toward him, but the armored youth weaves through the deadly volley with surprising agility. A confident smirk crosses his face as he relies on the body-strengthening skill, a formidable class that allows the user to drastically modify and enhance their own physical properties. Brimming with arrogance, he boasts that such simple attacks are useless against him, claiming the trajectory is so predictable he doesn't even need to dodge. From the sidelines, Finn screams for him not to get cocky as a massive boulder suddenly crashes directly into his blind spot. While the heavily built brawler recovered from the sudden impact, the battlefield around him descended into further chaos. An unseen force activated an acceleration skill, striking down a nearby student in a blur of motion. Watching the swift takedown, the agile fighter with twin tails froze in shock, realizing her own movements were being perfectly predicted by their hidden assailant. As the skirmish intensified, the fundamental laws of this world's combat became clear. The final classification of abilities operated on an entirely different axis. Meanwhile, Gumbo fiercely deflected a barrage of wooden stakes hurtling toward him and his teammate from the dense tree line. This unique class of skills was fundamentally distinct from a standard 3. Stepping in front of the relentless barrage, the cloaked figure known as Elk held his ground, shielding his vulnerable allies. Radiating a powerful, unseen energy, he unleashed his own unique skill to neutralize the incoming threat. With the immediate danger cleared, he glanced back over his shoulder, calmly asking his 2 companions if they were unharmed. Annoyed by the constant barrage, the scarred brawler clicked his tongue in frustration. He scanned the towering trunks around them, complaining that the dense forest of giant trees was a massive pain, serving as the perfect natural camouflage for the enemy team. Elk, his expression hidden behind his dark mask, quickly analyzed the trajectory of the attacks. He shook his head, correcting the brawler by stating confidently that there was only a single person targeting them from the shadows. The agile fighter agreed, her face tight with anxiety. She explained that her sensory skill picked up the exact same signature as the earlier thorn attack, deducing that the sniper had to be close by to maintain a line of sight. Suddenly, her eyes widened as a chilling sense of dread washed over her. The true terror of combat lay in the third rule of skills: level. When an ability reached its maximum level cap, it evolved, granting terrifying new properties. High above the trio, a colossal, smooth boulder plummeted from the canopy. Gumbo cursed the unseen attacker, while the terrified girl realized the enemy's simple thorn magic had evolved into a devastating, crushing force. A massive explosion of dust and debris erupted as the boulder slammed into the forest floor. A distance away, the light-haired sniper who launched the attack observed the towering smoke plume. He scoffed, doubting the trio was taken out so easily, and suspected the cloaked fighter intentionally allowed the strike to hit to use the resulting dust cloud as a smokescreen. Unfazed by their potential survival, he reasoned that he needed to wait for his skills cool down to reset anyway. Knowing that the cloaked boy was the strongest threat and would likely launch a counteroffensive, the sniper swiftly leaped through the giant branches to reposition himself. He bounded effortlessly through the upper canopy, his staff in hand. A confident smirk crossed his face as he calculated his next move. As long as his target was burdened with protecting his teammates, the boy's only option was to play defensively, making him the perfect prey for a scout's relentless assault. Sometime earlier, far from the battlefield, a dark-haired student named Rudra sat at a sunlit cafe table. He cast a skeptical glance across the patio, questioning if the person he had been brought to meet was truly worth his time. The subject of his doubt, a young girl with short hair and a neat bow, calmly took a sip from her teacup, entirely unbothered by his scrutiny. Beside them, Marcos Paisley leaned in with a self-assured smile. He assured Ridra that her unique abilities would make her an absolutely vital asset to their team's overarching strategy. Still unconvinced, Ridra watched as the girl produced a strange, lens-like object. He challenged her directly, demanding to know what kind of amazing skill this supposed key player actually possessed. Holding the monocle up to her eye, she explained with quiet confidence that her skill allowed her to see every single ability a person possessed simply by looking through the glass. Ridra leaned forward, his skepticism replaced by utter disbelief. He argued that appraisals were traditionally performed at shrines, not with Maras tools, and protested that they should be recruiting someone with actual combat prowess instead. Ignoring his complaints, the girl turned her gaze directly toward him. In a clear, carrying voice, she announced his class and revealed that his skill was Needle, currently sitting at level 28 before preparing to expose its evolution. Panic seized Ridra as he lunged forward, desperately clamping his hand over her mouth. He frantically scolded her for lacking manners, terrified that she was broadcasting his highly classified level and abilities to the entire cafe. Watching the exchange, Marcos simply smiled, noting that in a tournament where skill information was a closely guarded secret, possessing such comprehensive knowledge of their opponents would grant them an insurmountable advantage. He confidently outlined the rest of his strategy, explaining that by focusing entirely on opponents whose skills they could easily counter, they could avoid any troublesome abilities altogether. While the aristocrat casually sipped his tea, boasting about the time saved by not having to scout every opponent, the reality of the tournament raged on in the dense forest. Ridra darted through the trees, his eyes scanning the canopy as he calculated his enemy's blind spot. His calculations were cut short as a massive, severed log hurtled through the air directly toward him. The single projectile was merely the vanguard of a devastating barrage. Dozens of massive wooden stakes rained down from the sky, slamming into the earth and shattering the forest floor in a series of violent, dust-kicking impacts. As the dust settled, Ridra studied the embedded projectiles. He recognized them immediately as his own needles, now being used against him. However, noting their poor aim, he deduced that his unseen attackers were launching a desperate, anxious assault, likely driven by irritation. His tactical assessment was instantly shattered. Finn burst from the foliage, using the very needles he had just analyzed as makeshift footholds to propel herself forward with blinding speed, catching him completely off guard. With a fierce battle cry, she closed the distance in a flash, declaring that the three of them would emerge victorious as she launched a powerful, mid-air strike against the reeling swordsman. The explosive clash gave way to an eerie silence, the dense, sun-dappled woods hiding the aftermath of the sudden ambush. Deep within the underbrush, the scattered team had managed to regroup. Ridra quickly checked on the heavily armored Gumbo, and Finn confirmed he was safe. Beside them, a dark-haired teammate wearing a specialized mask and goggles expressed gratitude for the cover, but grimly warned that their hiding spot wouldn't keep them safe forever. The masked boy, his right eye concealed by a dark patch, reassured his anxious, light-haired companion. He explained in a hushed tone that he was actively using his skill to neutralize the enemy's attacks, biding his time until the perfect moment to launch a counteroffensive. He blinks in surprise as a sharp voice suddenly cuts through the tense silence, vehemently rejecting the grim situation. The fierce denial comes from the agile fighter, who kneels beside their light-haired leader. She passionately scolds him for blaming himself for his wounded arm, reminding him that they are a united three-person squad, and they will face whatever comes together. Stepping forward to support her, the masked youth places a firm, reassuring hand on the leader's shoulder. He insists that victory is still within their grasp as a team, urging his friend to stop carrying the heavy burden of their survival all by himself. Hearing this, the agile fighter's expression softens into a warm, encouraging smile as she tells their leader to lean on them more often. The masked boy nods in agreement, signaling that it is time to change their approach. Their renewed resolve stems from a daring strategy proposed earlier by the heavily armored Gumbo. With a confident grin, the sturdy warrior had outlined an unconventional plan, declaring that its success would require the combined strengths of both his agile teammates. Putting that very plan into motion, the team launches a coordinated counterattack. As the agile fighter dashes forward, the light-haired leader activates his trap. He reveals that the thorny projectiles their unseen enemy, Elk, had been using as footholds were actually his own needles, thanking his foe for conveniently spreading them across the battlefield. Capitalizing on the trap, the agile fighter propels herself high into the dense forest canopy with incredible speed. Her singular, critical mission is to locate Elk's hidden physical body among the branches and flush him out directly into her leader's line of sight. Her maneuver triggers a massive, explosive shockwave that rips through the treetops, sending leaves and debris raining down. Below, the leader and the masked boy stare up in awe as their combined strategy violently springs into action. Inside the martial arts tournament's emergency medical tent, the atmosphere is tense and quiet. The silence is broken as a frantic nurse calls out for the head nurse, pleading for her to examine a group of newly arrived patients whose severe wounds defy standard treatment. Dr. Nightingale rushes to the bedside, her eyes widening at the gruesome sight. A young student lies before her, his body a canvas of deep, piercing stab wounds. His arms and legs are mangled, and several fingers have been brutally severed. An assisting nurse gasps, assuming the boys were caught in a brutal fight, but the doctor shakes her head. She notes grimly that while the students are still alive, the nature of their injuries suggests something far more sinister. Surveying the bloodied bodies laid out on the cots, the doctor realizes the horrifying truth. The attacker had meticulously avoided inflicting any fatal blows on purpose. This was no mere tournament skirmish. It was calculated, agonizing torture. On the bed, the battered student regains a sliver of consciousness. Tears stream down his bruised face as he chokes on his own sobs, stammering in sheer terror about the boy who did this to him. Reaching out with a trembling, mutilated hand, he begs the medical staff to save his comrades. The nurses gently try to quiet him, assuring the frantic boy that he is being moved to the treatment room immediately. His mind flashes back to the nightmare in the forest. He recalls the chilling, arrogant smile of his tormentor, Arthur. The injured boy remembers begging for mercy, even surrendering their team's flag, only for Arthur to laugh and declare that he didn't care about the tournament. He only wanted to watch them suffer. The horrific memory continues to play out. He remembers Arthur turning his back and walking away into the shadows of the trees, right after casually severing his arm and fingers, leaving him broken on the forest floor. Back in the sterile light of the medical tent, the boy finally succumbs to exhaustion. Looking down at his shattered form, Dr. Nightingale quietly notes that if physical trauma is the extent of the damage, the healing team can likely mend his body, though the mental scars remain unspoken. She listened with a heavy heart as the grim reality of the tournament settled over the medical tent. The staff murmured in horror, struggling to comprehend how a mere freshman could inflict such cruel, one-sided torment just for fun, twisting a combat exercise into a sadistic game. The cratered earth left behind in the forest painted a chilling picture. The unseen observers could only conclude that the boy responsible was nothing short of a monster hiding beneath human skin. Meanwhile, far from the bloodshed, a starkly different scene unfolded in a quiet clearing. Sarisa Kinesis politely offered Crown Prince Elwood a beverage, and upon his request for tea, she immediately set to work. Rising to her feet, the young noblewoman activated her unique magic saint ability, Skill Rental. The prince watched with mild amusement, noting how perfectly suited the power, which allowed her to borrow the abilities of those who held affection for her, was for a mundane task like brewing tea. With a graceful wave of her wand, she seamlessly chained 3 borrowed spells together. She commanded a teleportation skill to summon the tea-ware, a spring skill to conjure water, and an ignition skill to boil it instantly. She presented the freshly brewed cup to the prince with a practiced smile. He praised her extravagant use of a triple spell combination for such a simple luxury, a compliment she accepted with a gracious bow. As they settled into their refined break, her thoughts drifted to her younger sibling. She voiced a quiet concern for her brother, who had ventured off alone to capture an enemy team's flag. The prince offered a reassuring smile, dismissing her worries. He confidently stated that given the opposing team's meager strength, her brother would face no real danger. Suddenly, a sharp rustle from the nearby bushes interrupted their peaceful tea time. Startled, the young woman turned toward the sound, while the heavily armored Gumbo, seated quietly beside them, calmly told her not to worry. Emerging from the foliage, Rashuo Kinesis stepped into the clearing with a casual smile. He apologized to his sister and the prince, admitting with a shrug that the enemy team had fled much faster than he anticipated, leaving him empty-handed. He stood before his teammates, casually dismissing his recent hunt. Elwood, however, voiced his discomfort, reminding the swordsman of his value to the team while firmly condemning senseless violence. The swordsman simply shrugged it off, claiming his targets had managed to escape, a blatant lie that prompted a dry retort from his sister about his own hypocritical nature. The prince remained entirely unconvinced by the excuse. He pointedly questioned how the swordsman could claim his prey had escaped when his armor, cape, and face were completely drenched in fresh blood. Prompted by the prince's observation, he finally looked down. He stared at his own crimson-stained fingers, a quiet sound of realization escaping his lips as the undeniable evidence of his brutality registered. A faint blush crept across his cheeks, and a chilling, innocent smile broke through the gore on his face. He softly acknowledged his own messy oversight, entirely unfazed by the gruesome state he was in. Meanwhile, deep within the tranquil expanse of the surrounding forest, the true aftermath of his hunt remained hidden among the dense foliage. Behind the thick trunk of an ancient tree, a severed, bloodied hand still tightly gripped a rectangular wooden block, a grim testament to the violence that had just transpired. The gruesome trophy hung suspended in the air, the hand brutally pinned to the bark by a thrown blade, dark blood trailing down the roots into the soil. Back at the clearing, the grisly reality of the forest felt worlds away. The swordsman casually requested a cup of tea, noting how relaxed his teammates were. His sister sighed, suggesting he change out of his ruined clothes before she used her magic to clean up the mess. Elsewhere in the woods, another team was dealing with their own aftermath. The masked student carefully adjusted his teammate's posture, declaring that his quick first aid should be enough to stabilize the dark-haired boy who sat slumped on the ground. The masked boy noted that their companion was completely knocked out, unsurprised given the sheer force of the blow he had taken. The towering, armored student standing over them sheepishly admitted he had actually held back during the strike, a confession that left the appraisal girl utterly shocked at his monstrous strength, while the injured boy groaned in confusion. He broke the heavy silence, turning to his masked companion and the agile fighter beside him. He asked if they recalled the head nurse's chilling announcement during the opening ceremony. The masked youth's visible eye narrowed as he grasped the grim implication. He reasoned that the Academy's miraculous healing meant taking a life during the tournament was entirely permissible. The armored swordsman nodded, his back turned as he laid out his strategy. He explained that incapacitating an enemy, leaving them unconscious or severely wounded, would force their squad into a rescue mission, effectively leveling the playing field. Turning back around, he clarified his intent. It wasn't the cleanest method, he admitted, but he planned to neutralize their target without dealing a lethal blow, striking swiftly before the rest of the opposing team could mount a counterattack. The masked boy looked down at the wooden block in his hand, weighing the moral cost. He questioned aloud if taking a life for something as trivial as an exam objective was truly justified. His thoughts drifted to his arrogant brother, recalling the blonde noble's casual cruelty and willingness to slaughter without hesitation. His grip tightened on the wooden block, knuckles turning white. He firmly declared that he had no desire to kill, nor did he want his companions to stain their hands with blood, a sentiment that earned a quiet look of respect from the agile fighter. The heavy tension broke as the armored warrior flashed a wide, approving grin. He enthusiastically praised the boy's unwavering kindness, declaring that such compassion was exactly what made him who he was. His smile softened into a look of genuine camaraderie as he admitted he had fully expected his friend to reject the lethal approach. The realization hit the masked boy and the agile fighter simultaneously. The entire ruthless proposal had been a test. As they glared at him, the towering swordsman broke into a nervous sweat, stammering defensively that he only wanted to reaffirm their squad's bond. He stood alongside his teammates, listening intently as the masked boy prepared to share his darkest secrets. The boy with the eye patch explained that before they could truly fight together, they needed to hear about the tragedy he had endured and the driving force behind his quest for revenge. As the boy prepared to delve into his past, a sudden shower of leaves drifted down through the forest canopy. His single eye tracked a leaf as it fluttered unnaturally close to his face. The sudden silence confused the muscular swordsman, who impatiently demanded to know why the story had stopped. But the masked boy's attention was entirely consumed by a chilling realization. There was no wind to carry the falling leaves. Panic seized him. Realizing the imminent danger, he screamed for his companions to get away, just as the seemingly harmless leaves began to spark and detonate. A deafening explosion ripped through the forest, engulfing the area in a massive pillar of smoke and debris. Elk leaped back, watching the devastating blast that had targeted his new allies. As the dust began to settle, the masked boy realized with relief that his warning had been just fast enough. Both the swordsman and the agile fighter had managed to deploy their defensive skills, shielding themselves from the worst of the blast. But the relief was short-lived. Emerging seamlessly from the smoke, Marcos Paisley materialized directly behind the masked boy, his hands already reaching out to strike. The arrogant noble's face was a mask of cold, calculating intent, his eyes locked onto his vulnerable prey. His terrifying power was straightforward but deadly. The skill known as explosion turned anything his hands made contact with into a volatile bomb. Before the masked boy could even react to the ambush, Marcos's fingers firmly grasped the sides of his head, sealing his fate. In a blinding flash, he was consumed by a violent detonation. True to the deadly nature of the skill, whatever Marcos touched was instantly turned into a bomb, sending shockwaves and shattered debris tearing through the air. His boast was met with horrified screams. The armored brawler and the agile fighter cried out Elk's name in unison, staring in disbelief at the billowing smoke where their comrade had just stood. Moments earlier, before the chaotic blast, the leader had pressed his scout for an update on the masked combatant. The appraiser, adjusting his specialized monocle, explained that his unique skill was nearly finished processing. By meeting specific conditions, he could fully comprehend a target's abilities, power level, and evolutionary potential. As he activated the final stage of his appraisal, his consciousness was violently pulled from the physical world. He found himself standing alone in a vast, desolate expanse of rippling blackness, murmuring in awe as the true nature of his target began to unfold. He looked around the endless void, confusion mounting. He questioned if he had been trapped within an enemy's illusion or cast into a dark sea, but quickly realized the terrifying truth was something entirely different. Scooping the dark substance into his hands, he watched in horror as it dissolved into a dense, chaotic stream of numbers and raw data. The sheer, unfathomable volume of information regarding the masked boy's abilities flooded his mind, far exceeding his capacity to process it. The mental overload pushed his brain to the breaking point, forcing a terrifying vision into his mind's eye. His body gave out instantly, collapsing toward the ground as his leader watched in sudden alarm. He crumpled into a lifeless heap on the forest floor, completely unresponsive. The leader stood over the fallen appraiser, the sudden loss of his key tactician leaving him momentarily stunned. He stared down at his unconscious teammate, a curse slipping from his lips as the gravity of the situation set in, desperation taking over. He dropped his knees and violently shook the scout by the shoulders, screaming for her to wake up. But his frantic pleas went unanswered. She remained completely unresponsive, lost to the overwhelming depths of the data she had tried to read. He cradled his fallen comrade, sweat beading on his forehead as panic set in. His mind raced, desperately trying to formulate a new strategy. Retreat seemed impossible, yet staying meant risking the rest of his allies in a battle they were rapidly losing. He cursed under his breath, demanding his own mind to think of a way out. Suddenly, a weak voice broke through his frantic thoughts. The scout, barely conscious and resting heavily against his shoulder, forced out a crucial piece of intelligence. With his last ounce of strength, he revealed their target's true ability, telekinesis. He looked up, his eye wide with lingering terror behind his specialized lens. Tears of strain welled up as he stammered out the most horrifying detail of all. The sheer magnitude of the power was completely beyond his capacity to measure. Demanding his leader's full attention, the boy pushed past his exhaustion. He explained that while the vastness of the enemy's data had blinded him, preventing a full analysis, one absolute truth had become terrifyingly clear amidst the overwhelming noise. The reality of their situation crystallized into a grim metaphor. Their opponent was an insurmountable king dominating the battlefield. As long as that singular, overwhelming force remained in play, any hope of victory was entirely impossible. However, this absolute dominance presented a fragile vulnerability. If they could somehow topple that central pillar, the entire foundation of the enemy's formation would collapse, leaving the remaining forces scattered and completely disorganized. Having delivered his final tactical assessment, the scout offered a weak apology for failing to see the battle through to its end. His leader listened in solemn silence, his expression hardening into a mask of pure resolve, silently vowing that this sacrifice would not be wasted. The quiet moment was violently shattered as two enemy combatants launched a surprise assault from behind. The heavily armored warrior and the agile fighter closed the distance in an instant, boldly declaring their intent to seize the objective right out from under him. Before the attackers could land their strike, the ground beneath them erupted in a massive, violent explosion. Thick tree roots tore through the earth, sending a shockwave of dirt and debris into the air, violently halting their advance. Thrown off balance, the armored man and the agile fighter stared in absolute shock at the cratered earth. They realized with dawning horror that their target hadn't just attacked them directly. He had weaponized the very environment, detonating the subterranean root system beneath their feet. The armored warrior clicked his tongue in frustration, the dust from the blast still settling around him. He called out to Finn, a sudden realization dawning on him as he deduced the nature of the explosive power they had just witnessed. Hearing this from afar, the light-haired leader merely smiled with quiet confidence. He mocked their assumption, questioning if they truly believed the massive underground eruption was simply a direct assault. He continued his deduction, explaining that the true purpose of the blast was to obliterate the roots and create a subterranean escape route. Down in the crater, the armored swordsman grunted in agreement, coming to the exact same conclusion. Spreading his arms wide, the calculating leader declared the enemy's true motive. The explosion was a desperate maneuver to rescue a fallen comrade from the battlefield. Wasting no time, the heavy swordsman and the agile fighter immediately bolted through the dense forest, their boots kicking up dirt as they pursued their target. Watching the move, the leader's smug expression deepened. He challenged his unseen opponent to respond, utterly convinced that no matter what strategies were deployed against his team, they would all be entirely useless. In his mind, the battlefield was nothing more than a chessboard, and he had already cornered his prey. He reasoned that a piece stripped of its primary telekinetic advantage was left with only a single, inevitable move. That move, he concluded, was a cowardly retreat. He watched as the two Academy fighters sprinted through the trees, fully believing the enemy was already on the run. But his arrogant certainty shattered in an instant. A terrifying vision suddenly overwhelmed his mind. A colossal, unseen force crashing down upon his mental chessboard, obliterating his carefully laid plans and leaving him gasping in sheer confusion. The source of that crushing pressure materialized before him. A massive, overwhelming presence loomed over the battlefield, radiating an intense aura that flooded the leader's senses and triggered his deepest, most primal instincts of survival. His breath hitched as a sudden, suffocating pressure washed over him. The arrogant certainty he held moments ago shattered, replaced by a creeping dread as he finally sensed the true scale of the threat. His eye widened in absolute terror, the pupil shrinking to a pinprick as the inescapable reality of his impending doom stared back at him. A colossal, blinding pillar of energy crashed down upon the battlefield with a deafening roar, obliterating the terrain and decisively ending the match in a crushing loss. Through the fading glare, the sniper finally unraveled the masked boy's trick. The explosion had only destroyed a discarded cloak. The boy himself had seamlessly dodged the blast, slipping behind them to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Standing helpless amidst the overwhelming light, he realized the full extent of his miscalculation. The enemy duo hadn't fled in panic. They had executed a flawless tactical retreat to escape the blast radius, completely dominating the battlefield with their superior teamwork. Elsewhere on the ruined grounds, his teammate, the appraisal girl, closed her eyes in bitter resignation. Despite their meticulously crafted plan, she silently apologized to her team, acknowledging that they had been completely outplayed. Sometime later, the dust of the arena gave way to the sterile quiet of the emergency medical tent. Medics carefully transferred the unconscious girl onto a recovery bed, securing her for treatment. Outside the tent, Rudra clicked his tongue in frustration, asking his leader if he was worried about her condition. The sniper remained composed, assuring him that she would recover perfectly under the head nurse's expert care. As they walked away down the quiet corridor, the dark-haired boy muttered a heavy, defeated admission of their loss, a bitter reality the sniper quietly confirmed. Seeking closure, the sniper approached his victorious opponent. He extended a hand, offering a small, ring-like device to the masked boy, his voice steady as he requested to ask one final question. Still kneeling in defeat, he handed over the small device and questioned his opponent's mercy, asking why he hadn't been killed before the flag was taken, especially since it could have been rigged to explode. The masked youth simply shrugged off the concern. He explained that while he would have been ruthless in a true battle, the rules of the martial arts tournament and the clear resignation written on the defeated leader's face made it obvious the match was already over. Hearing this, the fallen leader lowered his gaze, a faint, conceding smile touching his lips as he praised the young man's decisive and thorough judgment. Rising to his feet, the tension of the battle completely dissolved. With a broad, genuine grin, he bumped fists with his masked rival, openly and gracefully admitting his total defeat while his agile teammates stood by, sharing in the newfound camaraderie. The grand stage of the martial arts tournament lay quiet, a vast main arena marked by geometric platforms and floating crystalline structures, waiting for the victors to arrive. Suddenly, the silence shattered as brilliant pillars of light erupted across the arena floor, signaling the activation of the return magic. An announcer's voice boomed through the stadium, his excitement palpable as he declared that the first team had secured their spot in the main tournament. As the light faded, Crown Prince Elwood stepped forward with a confident wave, flanked by the formidable siblings, Rashuo and Sarisa, to the roaring cheers of the crowd. The announcer continued his fervent commentary, praising the triumphant return of the renowned sword master and magic saint. Unfazed by the adoration, the young swordsman adjusted his glove, noting with mild disappointment that despite their leisurely pace, they were still the first to return, leaving him to wonder what caliber of opponents awaited them. His sister offered a pragmatic smile, reminding him that this was merely a school event, unlikely to produce anyone capable of meeting his high expectations. He scoffed in agreement, admitting that being paired with the Crown Prince had already dashed his hopes for a challenging battle. High above the cheering masses, in the quiet luxury of a VIP box, a solitary figure watched the young prodigy with intense scrutiny. Duke Kinesis sat in stoic silence as a plump nobleman beside him rubbed his hands together, obsequiously praising the boy's performance as exactly what was expected of the Kinesis heir. The Duke's expression darkened, his single visible eye narrowing as he cut off the sycophant's flattery with a single, cold word of denial. He sat in the elevated VIP box, his gaze fixed on the arena below. The Duke clarified to his sycophantic companion that Rashuo was merely his second son. His expression darkened with disdain as he muttered a curse under his breath, disgusted that the boy was reveling in being a mere accessory to royalty. The plump noble beside him stammered, questioning the status of the eldest son. The Duke coldly replied that if Rashuo was content playing at a mere academy, he was just as useless as his predecessor, emphasizing that their house required an absolute, overwhelming talent. He declared that the eldest son of the Kinesis ducal house had died long ago. Meanwhile, far from the stadium's cheering crowds, the true eldest son sat in quiet contemplation. Deep in the forest, Elk sat on a fallen log across from his teammates, Gumbo and Finn, who stared at him in stunned silence. He apologized for the sudden revelation, but explained he no longer wanted to keep secrets from them. He confessed his true identity as the eldest son of the ducal house, revealing that his younger brother, Rashuo, had tried to kill him. His family had covered up the incident, leaving the world, and even his younger siblings believing he was dead. Gumbo leaned forward, acknowledging the massive scandal such a revelation would cause for a major house of the Deo Kingdom. Before asking if he could pose one question, the armored student pointed out the immense risk Elk was taking by enrolling in the academy with such a dangerous past, asking for his true motive. Elk calmly permitted the question. His expression hardened, his eyes narrowing with cold resolve. He stated that his sole reason for attending the academy was to exact revenge against the Kinesis family. Lowering his head as shadows fell across his face, he admitted that all the hatred he had tried to suppress was flooding back. He confessed that this dark purpose was the real reason he was using Gumbo and Finn to enter the tournament. He clutched his face, his eye wide with a dark, burning intensity. The memories of his past agony and public humiliation fueled a singular, overwhelming desire to inflict that same suffering upon his family, magnified tenfold. His dark confession hung heavy in the air, prompting a worried murmur from Finn. But before the tension could settle, Gumbo leaned back and shattered the silence with a booming shout, ready to summarize the situation. The sudden outburst caught both the swordsman and the agile fighter completely off guard, their eyes widening in shared bewilderment. Unfazed by their shock, the armored warrior crossed his arms and flashed a confident, easygoing grin. He casually reframed the grim quest for vengeance, declaring that all his teammate really wanted was a simple sibling rivalry. He continued his pragmatic assessment, pointing out that a clash between the brothers was inevitable anyway. Since the team led by the Kinesis siblings was the undisputed favorite, taking them down was just a necessary step on their path to winning the entire championship. The heavy atmosphere evaporated completely as both Gumbo and Finn rallied around their seated leader. With enthusiastic cheers, they vowed to crush the opposing team and claim victory, assuring him that they fully supported his personal goals. Overwhelmed by their unwavering loyalty, he looked up at his two companions. A profound sense of gratitude washed over him as he finally spoke the words he had been holding back, thanking them earnestly for standing by his side. The heartfelt moment was abruptly cut short as a brass horn was raised high in the distance. A deafening blast echoed through the trees, startling the trio. As the blare faded, they quickly analyzed the situation, realizing it wasn't the standard signal to end the battle. Sensing danger, the dark-haired leader immediately ordered his team to raise their guard and brace for an incoming attack. Without hesitation, the three teammates sprinted forward through the dense forest, their senses heightened as they prepared to face whatever new threat awaited them. He arrived at the scene only to find his heavily armored companion lying face down in the dirt, completely unresponsive. He called out Gumbo's name, his voice laced with sudden concern. Sensing a presence nearby, the masked youth snapped his head around. A silhouette stood quietly near the jagged rocks, prompting him to demand if the stranger was responsible for his friend's defeat. The figure stepped forward, revealing itself not as a man, but as a towering golem constructed entirely of jagged stone and earth. As he questioned if this monstrosity had crushed Gumbo, a voice echoed from the rocky shell, arrogantly challenging what he intended to do about it. Without warning, the earthen giant swung a massive, jagged arm, forcing the swordsman to leap back to avoid being crushed. Landing gracefully, he demanded the enemy hand over their flag so he could rush his injured friend to the infirmary, though the voice within the golem merely noted his impressive agility. As the dust settled, the golem's rocky limb suddenly began to crumble into loose dirt. A realization dawned on him. The creature was merely an empty shell of earthen armor, and the true opponent was hiding elsewhere, manipulating the soil from afar. Before he could pinpoint the caster's location, a young man with neatly parted hair emerged right behind him, resting a heavy hand on his shoulder. The stranger whispered chillingly that the very ground they stood upon was under his absolute control. The earth manipulator's gaze hardened into a confident, predatory stare. He declared with absolute certainty that this victory and the target before him belonged entirely to him. His arrogant declaration was cut short as Finn launched herself through the air, her leg extended in a fierce flying kick. She screamed her defiance, determined to protect her teammate from the ambush. But before her strike could land, both she and the masked youth recoiled in sudden, sharp pain. They cried out in confusion, frantically swatting at their bodies as an unseen force began to bite into their skin. Holding up his gloved hand, he stared in absolute horror at the source of their torment. A swarm of tiny, aggressive insects was crawling rapidly over his fingers, revealing a terrifying new threat hidden within the earth. He thrashed wildly, desperately swatting at the swarm of massive beetles clinging to his clothes. Behind him, Finn cried out in panic, urging him to hurry and save Gumbo, who had completely vanished from sight. Their frantic struggle was suddenly interrupted by a deep, ominous rumbling echoing through the forest. They both froze, glancing around in confusion as the vibrations grew stronger beneath their feet. His eyes widened in sheer terror as the source of the noise revealed itself. A colossal, writhing tidal wave of monstrous insects, centipedes, beetles, and winged vermin surged through the trees, bearing down on them with terrifying speed. Just as the grotesque swarm was about to engulf them, a blinding shockwave ripped through the air. The sheer force of the blast obliterated the front line of the insect army, scattering their shattered remains across the forest floor. The devastating strike carved a massive, clear path through the dense swarm, forcing the surviving creatures to recoil and scatter into the surrounding underbrush. From the shadows emerged a young girl with twin buns, casually playing a manifested trumpet. She giggled, boasting that while a single bug was mere vermin, her maestro-like manipulation skills turned them into a magnificent, unstoppable army, offering her mocking condolences to her trapped targets. Meanwhile, in a quieter section of the woods, the mastermind behind the ambush awaited his subordinate. He calmly asked if the objective had been secured. The Earth manipulator, Rox, stepped forward with a loyal nod, presenting the captured flag to a highly pleased Marcos Paisley. The arrogant noble smirked, his cunning trap having worked flawlessly. A deafening roar echoes across the battlefield as a massive, swirling vortex of razor-winged insects descends, obliterating everything in its path and kicking up a dense cloud of dust. Watching the destruction, the young girl with twin buns laughs gleefully. She boasts that her swarm can shred a massive tree in an instant, gleefully imagining that not a single human bone will be left behind in the wreckage. However, as the dust begins to settle, a strange, massive structure is revealed. Thick, twisted wooden roots have woven together into a dense, impenetrable dome, prompting a confused gasp from the onlookers. Safely sheltered within the hollow core of the wooden sphere, the masked boy and the agile fighter crouch low, completely untouched by the devastating swarm outside. His single visible eye remains calm and calculating, analyzing the situation from the safety of their makeshift bunker. As the roots retract and the pair stands up unharmed, the insect tamer recoils in shock. She quickly pieces together their survival, realizing the dents would block the carbon dioxide they exhaled, effectively blinding her tracking insects to their presence. Refusing to concede, she aggressively raises her brass instrument to her lips once more, shouting that she has more than just one method of attack. Before she can unleash her next technique, the masked boy steps forward, raising his hand as a concentrated ring of glowing energy materializes around his wrist. He calmly deconstructs her strategy, explaining that she intended to manipulate the wind for an aerial assault, rendering her far less threatening now that her trick is exposed. Beside him, the agile fighter scolds his relaxed attitude, while an ally is supposedly down, but he simply tells her not to worry against such weak attacks. Proving his point, a violent explosion of earth and debris erupts across the field. From the settling smoke, the heavily armored warrior strides forward, his armor scorched but his posture unbroken, sending a wave of panic through the opposing earth mage and his sycophantic allies. The heavily armored warrior wiped his cheek, scoffing at the attempt to take him down with a mere bird. He revealed that he had turned the surface of his face into solid steel just in time, saving himself from a fainting spell. With a confident smirk, he called out to Lord Marcos, demanding they settle the match properly. His taunt struck a nerve. The arrogant noble's face contorted in pure rage as he screamed, furious that a mere peasant was getting carried away. Before the furious lord could act, his loyal retainer stepped smoothly in front of him, raising a hand to shield his master. The armored brawler immediately locked eyes with the newcomer, branding him a clay doll and challenging him as his first opponent. Unfazed, the retainer calmly requested that his lord stand back, volunteering to handle the threat himself. The brawler scoffed, openly questioning how anyone with a shred of dignity could serve a man like Marcos. The Earth manipulator's expression remained stoic, his gaze unwavering as he defended his allegiance, stating simply that he owed his master a great deal. With his resolve stated, the loyal servant unleashed his magic. Massive slabs of jagged rock and earth erupted around him, encasing his body in a towering, heavily armored stone golem. From within the rocky shell, his voice echoed with chilling confidence, declaring that his opponent would not be hard to defeat. Far from intimidated, the steel-faced warrior grinned wickedly. He cracked his knuckles, the metallic sound ringing out as he welcomed the challenge, eager to test his own steel skills against the earthen behemoth. He lunged forward with explosive speed, pulling his fist back for a devastating strike. He roared a promise to tear the very soil off his opponent's body. The punch connected with a thunderous crack, but the stone armor didn't even chip. The brawler's eyes widened in shock as his momentum was completely halted. From within the golem, the earth mage calmly noted his opponent's fundamental misunderstanding of the soil's true nature. The towering construct explained that earth possessed both the hardness to swallow all things and the softness to support them. Realizing the impenetrable defense he was up against, the steel-faced warrior cursed under his breath, his confidence shattering as he recognized the futility of his attack. Without missing a beat, the massive stone golem retaliated. A colossal, rocky fist swept upward in a brutal uppercut, launching the armored brawler high into the air, completely at the mercy of the earth mage's overwhelming power. He crashed hard into the debris, lying face down and motionless amidst the shattered stone. Standing safely behind the towering stone golem, Marcos erupted into arrogant laughter. He pointed a gloved finger at the fallen fighter, mocking him and declaring that the sheer difference in their skill levels made victory impossible. But the fight was far from over. Slowly, the battered warrior pushed himself up from the rubble, his voice cutting through the laughter as he warned Marcos to save his boasting. He rose to his feet, his armor scuffed and his breath heavy. Glaring at his opponents, he demanded they wait until he was properly defeated before celebrating. Despite his bravado, frustration gnawed at him. He clenched his fist tightly, realizing with bitter clarity that his standard steel enhancement skills were completely ineffective against the golem's impenetrable defense. In that moment of doubt, a memory surfaced in his mind, a quiet conversation about the true nature of power, He remembered being told that no matter what innate skill a person possessed, it could always be pushed further through relentless application and hard work. The voice belonged to Noah, who had sat casually before him, offering a profound truth. Noah had explained that victory was never guaranteed simply by the skills one was born with, emphasizing that if a mere telekinesis user could find a way to win, then surely he could become even stronger. Fueled by the memory, his eyes burned with renewed intensity. With a ferocious roar, he launched himself forward, closing the distance with explosive speed. A deafening explosion rocked the battlefield as a strike connected. Marcos recoiled in sheer disbelief, while Rox stared in stunned silence, unable to comprehend how his supposedly indestructible stone armor had just been shattered. As the dust cleared, the warrior stood victorious. His right arm had completely transformed, reshaping the steel into a massive, devastating lance. Looking down at his defeated foes, he calmly stated that he simply couldn't afford to lose to the likes of them. He knew the path ahead was long. In his mind's eye, the young lord he had sworn to follow was already miles ahead, a distant figure whose back he could barely even see. Snapped back to the reality of the arena, his opponent, the Earth Mage, stared in disbelief at the devastating weapon. Rox realized the armored warrior had evolved his skills at the last possible second, mimicking his own capacity to alter forms. The heavily built fighter explained the mechanics of his newfound destructive power. By packing his steel-like skin with iron powder metabolites and striking, he could trigger a massive, localized explosion. However, the immense power came at a steep cost. Smoke drifted from the warrior's right arm as he admitted that his own limb couldn't withstand the sheer explosive force of the attack, rendering it useless for the time being. Seizing the opportunity, the Earth Mage wasted no time. With a swift command of his magic, he summoned another massive, jagged stone golem from the arena floor, ready to crush his seemingly handicapped opponent. The rocky behemoth lunged forward, bringing its heavy fists down in a brutal assault. The armored youth braced himself, raising his remaining functional arm to block the crushing blow with his heavy shield. As the stone fists battered against the metal defense, Rox watched with a smug, predatory gaze. He confidently declared that with only one working arm, there was absolutely no way the swordsman could secure victory. But the heavily built fighter just smirked, calmly stating that he had already won. A sharp, metallic clack echoed through the air as the Earth Mage looked down in sheer terror, realizing the explosive steel enhancement hadn't just been limited to the arms. It was equipped on the legs, too. With a devastating upward thrust, he unleashed a brutal kick. The explosive force instantly obliterated the stone golem into a shower of pebbles and sent the Earth Mage hurtling through the air before crashing violently into the dirt. Standing tall amidst the settling dust, the armored warrior threw his head back and let out a triumphant, earth-shaking roar, leaving his battered opponent trembling on the ground in utter defeat. Raising her hands in defeat, the girl with the twin buns stammered her surrender. Crouched nearby, the masked boy noted that their time was almost up, prompting his agile companion to suggest they finally retrieve their flag. Confused by his words, she asked what he meant. Looming behind the masked boy and his companion lay the massive, battered corpses of a multi-headed serpent beast, completely vanquished. The boy calmly clarified that he was referring to the duration of their match. Panic and disbelief washed over her face. She cursed under her breath, realizing she had been warned to watch out for Elwood's team. Yet these unknown students had just effortlessly dismantled her ultimate summons. Her shock was cut short as a towering, muscular student named Gumbo suddenly appeared, effortlessly scooping her up under his arm. He called out to his masked teammate, boasting that he had arrived right on schedule. The agile fighter playfully accused him of wandering off to play while they handled the actual combat. Gumbo brushed off the remark, claiming he simply didn't want to get in their way, and confidently asked if they had secured the win. To prove his own success, he tossed a capture trumpet to the agile fighter, who caught it with a surprised yelp. He proudly announced that he had secured the flag, telling them to look forward to the main battle. The masked boy noted his teammates' bold words, while the agile fighter smiled, realizing they had one more thing to anticipate in the main event. Gumbo let out a booming laugh, warning them not to chicken out when the real fight began. With their victory absolute, the trio raised their fists in triumph, declaring they had captured the sky flag. They stood before a massive, glowing pedestal, the mechanism signaling their advancement. Leaving the trial grounds behind, the three teammates stepped out from the shadows and walked together into the blinding light of the main arena. A deafening roar of cheers washed over them. The agile fighter stared in awe at the massive crowd, while the masked boy calmly observed the noise, deducing that they were the final team to arrive. He stood with his team in the center of the vast, brightly lit arena, the sheer scale of the stadium dwarfing the few remaining competitors as a booming voice echoed from above, confirming their arrival. Looking up toward the source of the voice, the masked boy and the other finalists listened as the elderly headmaster addressed them. The old man noted that 4 teams remained, more than he had anticipated, hinting that this flag battle held a deeper significance than a simple test of skill. The headmaster's gaze swept across the surviving competitors, acknowledging their distinct achievements. He praised one for unlocking new power commended another for revealing their true potential, and recognized a third for proving their undeniable worthiness to stand on this stage. Having delivered his cryptic praise, the headmaster abruptly concluded his speech. He announced that a tournament would commence the following day, casually dismissing the weary students to rest until the matchups were revealed. Before the students could even process the sudden dismissal, a sharp smack echoed through the arena. A stern woman in a dark uniform struck the headmaster, furiously demanding to know why he was ending the orientation so abruptly without providing any real details. Taking control of the situation, the woman introduced herself as Vice Head Elsie. While the masked boy quietly realized that this seemingly youthful woman was actually in her 70s and a longtime friend of the headmaster, Elsie scolded the old man for his negligence and ordered the students to listen closely to her instructions. Her voice projecting clearly across the vast space, Elsie explained the logistics for the evening. She assured the 4 remaining teams that fully equipped accommodations and meals had been prepared for them, instructing them to remain in their designated quarters until the morning. However, her tone quickly shifted from hospitable to a stern warning. She laid down an absolute prohibition on the use of skills or magic while in the dormitories, citing past incidents where foolish competitors had spent the night attempting to artificially enhance their teammates with spells or illicit substances. Emphasizing the severity of the rule, Elsie made it clear that such cheating had resulted in immediate disqualification in the past. She reminded the victors that from this point forward, the trials would test nothing but their raw, unadulterated abilities. As she delivered her final ultimatum, warning them that no true victory could be born from overnight trickery, the masked boy remained unfazed. He silently acknowledged her words, knowing full well that his team had never intended to rely on such cheap tactics to begin with. He reached up, pulling down the dark fabric of his mask and slipping off the eye patch, finally letting out a breath. As he revealed his true face, Elwood strode past him, confidently calling his own team forward, flanked by the Earth Mage and the Insect Tamer. Watching the prince depart, the towering, muscular brawler beside him crossed his arms and grunted, asking who the passing noble was. The Earth Mage simply brushed it off, casually referring to the prince as something akin to a friend. Their attention quickly shifted as they stepped through the doorway of their assigned quarters, their eyes widening in unison. A collective gasp of pure astonishment escaped the trio. The room before them was nothing short of magnificent. Sunlight poured through large glass doors, illuminating a spacious, pristine living area furnished with plush seating, elegant decor, and vibrant potted plants. The surprises continued as familiar voices called out his name. Nick and Mary rushed forward, their faces beaming with excitement as they congratulated the young swordsman and his team on successfully clearing the grueling flag battle. He smiled warmly at his friends. Nick chimed in, mentioning they thought the team might need a hand after the exhausting match. Just then, Emma stepped into the room, carrying a tall stack of neatly folded garments, explaining she had brought spare battle clothes for everyone. Looking down at his torn and battered uniform, he apologized for ruining the clothes she had worked so hard to make. Emma's expression softened into a gentle smile. She reassured him, insisting that the damaged fabric was simply proof that her creations had successfully protected him during the fierce battle. Meanwhile, across the room, Nick was entirely captivated by the lavish spread laid out on the dining table. He marveled at the massive, perfectly roasted bird, declaring the delivered feast to be the absolute height of luxury. Finishing her preparations, Emma turned to the bespectacled boy, asking him to call the rest of the team over since the table was finally set. Nick, however, hesitated, a confused look crossing his face as he glanced toward the back of the room. There was no need to call them. Exhausted from the day's relentless trials, the trio had already collapsed onto the massive bed, fast asleep and snoring softly in a tangled, haphazard pile. He rested peacefully, the exhaustion of the trials finally catching up to him as a quiet voice nearby suggested letting the team sleep just a bit longer. But his rest was abruptly interrupted. He slowly opened his eyes to a starry void, only to be startled by a familiar, booming voice. The goddess Pipina leaned in close, excitedly shouting his name to announce her presence. As he lay flat on the cloudy ground of the ethereal realm, she reminded him of their previous encounter. She explained that he was someone lost between life and death, and that a massive time difference of a few thousand years existed between this realm and his own. Cradling his head in her lap, the winged goddess revealed a new development. She explained that there were others like him in his world, people who had been revived with new skills, and they had formed an organization with the specific goal of summoning her into his era. With a thoughtful tap to her chin, she noted that despite their incredible skills, the members of this group seemed to have a few screws loose, engaging in highly questionable and crazy activities. She named the mysterious syndicate Seven's Haven, describing them as a cult-like group of rogue figures wielding staves and wearing sun-shaped halos. Leaning in with a sharp, intense grin, she delivered her request. True to their name, the organization consisted of 7 members, and she wanted him to eliminate them for her. He stared back with a flat, unamused expression, clearly overwhelmed by the sudden divine mandate. Sensing his hesitation, she quickly backpedaled, cheerfully adding that he could just keep it in the corner of his mind and handle it whenever he had the time. With a final, breezy farewell, her presence faded, leaving him standing alone in the fading light of the dreamscape. Now fully awake, he clenched his gloved fist, realizing the encounter hadn't been a mere dream. The revelation weighed heavily on him. There were 7 dangerous believers out there, anomalies from the in-between just like himself, and he had no idea how to face them. He pushed the lingering thoughts of the goddess and her dire warnings aside, realizing he needed to focus entirely on the battle immediately ahead. With a sharp, determined gaze from beneath his dark hood, he called out to his team, signaling that it was time to move. Hearing his command, his companions and rivals alike steeled themselves for the impending clash. Gumbo's stern face tightened with anticipation, while Finn's expression hardened into a confident glare. Beside them, Nick adjusted his glasses with a serious frown, and Emma looked on with wide, resolute eyes, the tension palpable among the gathered students. Stepping out into the sunlit arena, the trio presented a formidable front. The dark fabric of his heavy overcoat billowed behind him as he took the lead, flanked by the energetic Finn and the towering, muscular Gumbo. The air crackled with excitement as the grand announcement echoed across the grounds, officially marking the beginning of the martial arts competition's team finals.